At my wedding rehearsal, my sister appeared in my custom gown, holding my fiancé's arm. Surprise. She giggled. We're eloping tonight. My mother clapped. She looks so much better in white. I smiled, pulled out my phone, and showed them something that froze their smiles instantly. Surprise. Brittany's voice echoes through Murphy's Hall the moment I walk in. She's standing in the center of the room wearing my ivory wedding dress, arms spread wide like she's announcing a Broadway show. We're eloping tonight. My fiancé Richard stands frozen beside her, his face drained of color. Mom claps her hands together. Isn't this exciting, Susan? She looks so much better in white than you ever would. The words hit me while I'm still processing the sight of my sister twirling in the custom gown I saved 8 months to afford. The garment bags slipped from my hands and hit the floor with a dull thud. Inside those bags are the bridesmaid dresses I came to deliver for tomorrow's final fittings, my wedding that was supposed to happen in less than 24 hours. The hall's afternoon light streams through tall windows, illuminating every detail of my stolen dress. The hand-sewn pearl buttons. The delicate lace overlay that took 3 appointments with the seamstress to perfect. The cathedral train that I specifically chose because it reminded me of Grace Kelly's wedding photos. What did you just say? My voice comes out smaller than intended, barely audible over the blood rushing in my ears. Brittany stops spinning and faces me with that radiant smile she's perfected since childhood, the one that gets her out of trouble, gets her attention, gets her everything she wants. Richard and I are getting married tonight instead of you two tomorrow. Isn't it romantic? A real love story. Before we continue with this shocking betrayal, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing stories about family loyalty and standing up for what's right. If you believe women deserve better than manipulation and lies, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more women who need to hear this. Now let's see how this wedding disaster unfolds. The room tilts slightly. I grip the door frame to steady myself, my eyes scanning the scene before me. This isn't some nightmare I can wake up from. This is actually happening in Murphy's banquet hall, the venue I booked 18 months ago, paid deposits for, dreamed about walking down the aisle in. She realized we belong together, Brittany continues, reaching for Richard's hand. He lets her take it, but his fingers remain limp, lifeless. We've been seeing each other for months now. Haven't we, sweetheart? Richard's Adam's apple bobs as he swallows hard. Brittany, maybe we should. Should what? She interrupts, her voice sharp for just a moment before returning to its syrupy sweetness. Tell everyone how we fell in love. How you couldn't resist me anymore. I watch Richard's face throughout this exchange, searching for some sign of the man I thought I knew. The man who proposed to me 6 months ago beside the lake where we had our first date. The man who spent hours helping me plan our future together. His usual confidence has completely evaporated, replaced by something that looks like pure terror. Mom moves closer to them, her digital camera ready. Come on, you two, let me get some pictures. This is such a special moment. The flash pops repeatedly, creating bright bursts of light that make everything feel even more surreal. Mom, stop, I manage to say, but she waves me off with that familiar dismissive gesture I've endured my entire life. Oh, Susan, don't be such a spoil sport. These things happen. Love finds a way, you know. She adjusts the camera settings while speaking, not even looking at me. Besides, you're so practical. You'll find someone more suitable. Someone more your level. Aunt Carol appears from behind the makeshift bar, carrying champagne flutes that bubble and catch the light. I just can't get over this surprise, she gushes, pressing glasses into Brittany and Richard's hands. When did you two realize you were meant to be together? This is like something out of a romance novel. It just happened naturally. Brittany lies smoothly, accepting her champagne with graceful fingers. You know how it is when you meet your soulmate. Everything else just fades away. I notice Richard hasn't touched his champagne. His phone buzzes in his pocket and he jumps like he's been shocked. The device lights up through his jacket, casting a brief glow before he quickly silences it. This happens twice more in the span of a minute, each time making him more agitated. Richard, put that phone away. Mom scolds, lowering her camera momentarily. This is your engagement party. Engagement party. The words echo in my head as I stand there, still unnoticed by most of the people filling the room. My extended family members, aunts, uncles, cousins I haven't seen in months, are all here, congratulating the happy couple, raising impromptu toasts to true love. The same people who were supposed to celebrate my wedding tomorrow. How long has this been going on? I ask, finally finding my voice. The room falls quiet. All eyes turn to me, some sympathetic, others annoyed by my interruption of their festivities. Brittany's smile never wavers. Oh, Susan, does it really matter? What matters is that Richard is finally with the right person. She takes a sip of champagne, then adds with fake concern, I hope you're not going to make this difficult. I mean, you wouldn't want to force someone to marry you when their heart belongs to someone else, would you? The cruelty in her words is wrapped in such sweet packaging that half the room probably thinks she's being considerate. But I know my sister better than anyone. I've lived 29 years as her shadow, watching her charm her way through life while I work twice as hard for half the recognition. That's my dress, I say quietly, pointing at the ivory silk that flows around her feet like water. Oh, this old thing? Brittany looks down at herself as if just noticing what she's wearing. I hope you don't mind. It was just hanging there in your closet and Richard said he wanted to see me in white. Didn't you, darling? Richard's jaw tightens. He still won't look directly at me, his eyes darting between the floor and the windows like he's looking for an escape route. When he finally speaks, his voice is barely above a whisper. Susan, I can explain. Explain what? I step closer and he instinctively takes a step back. Explain how you've been cheating on me with my sister? Explain how you're wearing the suit you bought for our engagement photos while she's wearing my wedding dress. Now, Susan, Mom intervenes, stepping between us. There's no need to get hysterical. These things happen. Richard realized he made a mistake, that's all. Be grateful he figured it out before you embarrassed yourself at the altar. Embarrassed myself. As if being abandoned and betrayed is somehow my fault. As if saving every penny to afford a decent wedding, working double shifts at the county clerk's office, planning every detail for months. As if all of that makes me pathetic rather than dedicated. Uncle Frank, who's been quiet until now, clears his throat uncomfortably. Maybe we should all sit down and talk about this calmly. There's nothing to talk about, Brittany says firmly, moving closer to Richard and wrapping her arm through his. Richard chose me. End of story. Susan needs to accept that and move on. But I'm watching Richard's face and what I see there isn't love or certainty. It's panic. Pure, undiluted panic. His phone buzzes again and this time when he checks it his face goes completely white. His hands start trembling so badly he nearly drops the device. Who keeps calling you? I ask. Nobody, he says too quickly. Work stuff. You know how it is. But I do know how it is, and Richard has never been jumpy about work calls. He's always been confident, almost cocky about his business dealings. This nervous energy is completely new and it's getting worse by the minute. The pieces of a puzzle start forming in my mind. Richard's recent secretive behavior. His vague explanations about weekend trips. The way he's been avoiding certain topics, deflecting questions about his past. And now this panicked response to whoever is trying to reach him. My phone feels heavy in my back pocket. The document I discovered 3 weeks ago during routine paperwork processing burns in my memory. I've been carrying this knowledge for 21 days, checking and double-checking, hoping I was wrong, praying there was some innocent explanation. But looking at Richard now, watching him fall apart in real time, I know there's nothing innocent about any of this. With trembling fingers, I reach into my back pocket and pull out my phone. The device feels weighted down by the knowledge I've been carrying for 3 weeks. Richard's face goes from pale to completely ashen when he sees me scrolling through my photos. What's on your phone, Susan? Brittany demands, her voice sharp with sudden uncertainty. I find what I'm looking for and hold up the screen. It's a photograph of a marriage certificate, clear as day. Richard Thomas Mitchell, married to Jennifer Martinez on August 15, 2 years ago. Phoenix, Arizona. The room goes completely silent. 3 weeks earlier, I'd been having an ordinary Tuesday at the county clerk's office. The autumn rain drummed against the windows while I worked through my usual morning routine. Process marriage certificates, check for completeness, file them in chronological order. The stack on my desk was particularly thick that day. Apparently October was popular for courthouse weddings. I was halfway through the pile when Richard's name jumped out at me like a neon sign. My coffee mug froze halfway to my lips. There it was, printed in official county letterhead, Richard Thomas Mitchell. But this wasn't our paperwork. I hadn't processed any documents related to our upcoming wedding yet. My hands started shaking as I read the date, August 15th, 2 years ago. The bride's name was Jennifer Martinez, and the ceremony had taken place in Phoenix, Arizona. My first thought was clerical error. Someone had filed paperwork in the wrong county, or maybe there was another Richard Mitchell with the same middle name. But as I examined the document more closely, my stomach began to sink. His birth date matched perfectly. His parents, William and Margaret Mitchell, were listed as witnesses, the same parents who'd hugged me tight at Christmas dinner last year and told me how happy they were to welcome me into the family. The signature at the bottom was unmistakably his. I'd seen Richard sign checks, lease agreements, Valentine's cards. I knew the way he looped his R's and crossed his T's. I photocopied the certificate with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. The machine's bright light seemed to burn the image into my retinas, proof that the man I was supposed to marry in 6 weeks had been married to someone else just 2 years ago. Someone he'd never mentioned. Someone whose existence he'd completely erased from his personal history. That evening I couldn't eat the dinner I'd prepared. Couldn't focus on the television show I'd been following. By midnight, I was sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop open, using my access to public records databases to search for more information about Jennifer Martinez. What I found made me physically ill. Divorce papers filed 8 months ago in Maricopa County, Arizona. Jennifer Martinez versus Richard Thomas Mitchell. The initial filings cited irreconcilable differences, but the supporting documents told a much darker story. Page after page of allegations that made my hands shake as I read them. Systematic financial fraud and misrepresentation of assets. False claims regarding employment status and income. Abandonment of marital residence without notice or explanation. And the phrase that made bile rise in my throat. Theft of joint marital assets totaling $37,000. Jennifer Martinez had trusted Richard completely. She'd combined their bank accounts, put his name on her credit cards, helped him establish business credit using her excellent financial standing as collateral. Then one morning she'd woken up to find him gone along with every penny they'd saved together. I spent the rest of that night printing documents, cross-referencing court filings, following a paper trail that painted Richard as a calculating predator. The divorce proceedings had been messy and prolonged because Jennifer couldn't locate Richard to serve him papers. He'd vanished so completely that she'd had to publish legal notices in newspapers, hoping he'd surface long enough to respond to the divorce petition. The next morning at work, I felt like I was living in an alternate reality. My co-workers chatted about their weekend plans while I sat at my desk staring at the evidence of Richard's deception. When my supervisor asked about wedding preparations, I managed to smile and give cheerful responses while my world crumbled internally. During my lunch break, I drove to our bank and requested detailed statements for our joint savings account. The teller, Mrs. Patterson, had known me since I was a teenager and chatted warmly while she printed the records. "Such an exciting time for you, dear," she said, handing me the papers. "Planning a wedding must be so much work." If only she knew. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot, reviewing months of transactions. Small withdrawals at first, each one accompanied by reasonable explanations from Richard. $200 for the photographer's deposit. $500 for catering adjustments. $300 for additional flowers. The amount seemed modest, typical wedding expenses that I'd been happy to share. But when I cross-referenced these withdrawals with our actual vendor agreements, nothing matched. The photographer had received a completely different amount than what Richard claimed to have paid. The florist showed no record of the deposit he'd mentioned. The caterer's contract reflected a payment schedule that bore no resemblance to our bank statements. Richard had been systematically stealing from our joint account for months, using our wedding planning as cover for his theft. Just like he'd done to Jennifer Martinez. I started keeping detailed notes in a composition notebook I bought at the drugstore. Every inconsistency, every vague explanation, every red flag I'd dismissed during our year-and-a-half relationship. His expensive watch that appeared suddenly, supposedly a performance bonus from work. The designer suits that seemed beyond his stated salary range. His reluctance to discuss his job in specific terms or introduce me to colleagues. Most disturbing were the business trips to Phoenix that he'd mentioned casually over the past year. Client meetings, he'd said. Industry conferences. Networking opportunities. Now I understood the real purpose of those trips. He hadn't been building professional relationships, He'd been maintaining his double life, checking on his abandoned wife while she struggled to rebuild her finances and locate him for divorce proceedings. By the end of that first week of investigation, I'd discovered bank transfers to accounts in Colorado and Oregon states where Richard claimed he'd never traveled. Social media searches revealed fragments of relationships with women in both locations, though most of the profiles had been hastily deleted or made private when I tried to dig deeper. The pattern became clear as I assembled more pieces of the puzzle. Richard was a serial con artist who targeted women in their late 20s and early 30s, women who were financially stable and emotionally ready for commitment. He'd establish himself in their lives, gain access to their resources, then vanish when the situation became too complicated or when he'd extracted maximum benefit. I created a timeline spanning 3 years, mapping Richard's movements across state lines. Each location represented another woman, another victim, another life he'd damaged while building his next opportunity. Jennifer Martinez wasn't an isolated incident. She was part of a calculated pattern of financial and emotional devastation. The most heartbreaking discovery came during my second week of investigation. Child support records from Arizona Family Court showed Jennifer Martinez fighting to collect payments for a 4-year-old daughter named Sophia, Richard's biological daughter. A little girl he'd abandoned along with her mother, leaving them with nothing while he moved on to establish his next fraudulent relationship. Every evening after work became a ritual of documentation. I'd spread court records across my kitchen table, photograph bank statements, scan legal documents. My dining room looked like a detective's evidence board, with timelines taped to the walls and file folders organized by state and victim. I was methodical about it, approaching the investigation with the same careful attention to detail that made me good at my job. But this wasn't routine paperwork. This was evidence of systematic criminal behavior by the man I'd trusted with my future, the man who'd convinced me he was ready to build a life together. 3 weeks of carrying this knowledge while pretending everything was normal. 3 weeks of watching Richard plan our wedding, knowing he'd done this exact same thing with other women. 3 weeks of wondering whether I'd have the courage to expose him or if I'd end up like Jennifer Martinez, financially ruined and emotionally shattered while he moved on to destroy someone else's trust. Standing here in Murphy's Hall, watching the man I thought I loved fall apart as he recognizes the evidence on my phone screen, I finally have my answer. The methodical clerk in me has built an unshakable case, and Richard knows his carefully constructed lies are about to crumble completely. Richard takes a shaky step backward when he sees the marriage certificate on my phone screen. His face has gone from pale to gray, and beads of sweat are forming along his hairline despite the cool October air conditioning in Murphy's Hall. That's not what it looks like, he stammers, his usual confidence completely shattered. Really? I swipe to the next photo, Jennifer's divorce filing. Then explain this. The silence stretches uncomfortably as everyone in the room leans forward to get a better look at my phone. But I'm not done. I've spent 3 weeks building this case and I'm going to present every piece of evidence I've gathered. Jennifer Martinez, I announced to the room. Kindergarten teacher in Phoenix. 28 years old when she married you, Richard. She thought she'd found her soulmate. I swiped to another document, a victim impact statement Jennifer had filed with the court. I'd found it buried deep in the legal proceedings, a heartbreaking account of how Richard had systematically dismantled her life. She worked at Sunrise Elementary teaching first grade. Had her own apartment, her own car, $23,000 in savings from years of careful budgeting. My voice stays steady as I read from her statement. She met you at a coffee shop near her school. You told her you were recently divorced, working as a business consultant, temporarily staying at extended stay hotels while looking for the right place to settle down. Brittany's confident smile is starting to waver. Susan, what does this have to do with anything? That's ancient history. Ancient history? I laugh, but there's no humor in it. Richard married Jennifer on August 15, 2 years ago. We started dating 6 months later in February, which means he was still married when he asked for my number at that bookstore downtown. Richard's phone buzzes again, and this time when he checks it, his hands are shaking so badly he nearly drops the device. I catch a glimpse of the screen, multiple missed calls from a Phoenix area code. Jennifer's not just ancient history, Brittany. She's very much current events. Especially since Richard never actually divorced her. The room explodes in shocked murmurs. Mom's camera hangs forgotten in her hands. Aunt Carol sets down her champagne glass so hard it rings against the table. That's impossible, Mom says weakly. He can't marry you if he's already married to someone else. Exactly. It's called bigamy, Mom. It's a felony. I swipe to another document, the child support case that had kept me awake for 3 nights straight. But Jennifer's situation gets worse. Much worse. Because 4 months after their wedding, she discovered she was pregnant. Brittany's face goes white. Richard looks like he might actually faint. Sophia Martinez. Born June 10th, 4 years ago. Richard's biological daughter. I hold up a photo I'd found through my public records search. A court filing that included a picture of a beautiful little girl with dark hair and Richard's distinctive green eyes. He abandoned both of them when Sophia was 6 months old. Disappeared one morning while Jennifer was at work, taking every penny from their joint accounts, her grandmother's antique jewelry, and even the baby formula she'd bought in bulk. The silence in Murphy's Hall is deafening. Even the catering staff has stopped setting up tables to listen. Jennifer's been working 2 jobs ever since. I continue, my voice growing stronger with each revelation. Teaching during the day, cleaning offices at night, trying to make ends meet while raising a toddler alone. The state of Arizona has been trying to collect child support from Richard for 3 years. That's why he keeps changing his phone number, why he never stays at the same address for more than a few months. Richard's phone buzzes again. This time he doesn't even look at it. But Jennifer isn't Richard's only victim. I swipe to a new set of documents. Maria Santos, Denver, Colorado. Relationship started 18 months ago, ended 10 months ago when Richard disappeared with her inheritance money, $28,000 her grandfather left her. I'd spent days tracking down Maria's story through social media posts, court filings, and credit reports. She'd been more cautious about sharing details publicly, but the financial devastation was clear from the legal documents. Maria was a nurse practitioner. 32 years old, owned her own condo, had excellent credit. Richard told her the same story. Recently divorced consultant, family money tied up in legal proceedings. He moved in after 3 months, convinced her to add his name to her bank accounts to simplify their finances for their upcoming marriage. I look directly at Brittany as I continue. Sound familiar? The same rapid timeline, the same financial integration, the same promises about building a future together. Then there's Rebecca Chin in Portland, Oregon. Physical therapist, 31 years old. Richard's relationship with her overlapped with Maria's by 4 months. He told Rebecca that Maria was a business partner who was helping him transition his consulting practice to the West Coast. The documents I'd uncovered about Rebecca were the most recent, and the most disturbing. Richard had been with her until just 2 months before he'd proposed to me. Which meant he'd been juggling 3 relationships simultaneously before narrowing his focus to me as his next primary target. Rebecca lost her car, her apartment deposit for a place they were supposed to move into together, and $15,000 in credit card debt that Richard ran up using cards he'd convinced her to get in both their names. I paused, letting that sink in. She filed a police report, but since he'd crossed state lines, it became a federal matter. She's still dealing with damaged credit and debt collectors. Richard slumps against the wall, his phone still buzzing incessantly in his hand. The confident, charming man I thought I knew has completely disappeared, replaced by someone who looks cornered and desperate. The pattern is always the same, I explained to my shocked family members. Richard identifies financially stable women in their late 20s or early 30s. Women who are emotionally ready for commitment, who have assets he can access, who trust easily because they're looking for genuine partnership. I turned to face Richard directly. You told each of us the same lies. Recently divorced, working in consulting, family money tied up in probate court. You moved in quickly, gained access to finances, then created emergencies that required you to relocate for work. You promised to send for us once you were established in your new city. Brittany is staring at Richard with growing horror. Is this true? Are you really married to someone else? Richard opens his mouth but no words come out. His phone buzzes again, and this time I can hear it clearly. A phone call from Phoenix area code 602. That's probably Jennifer, I say calmly. I contacted her yesterday and told her where you'd be today. She's been trying to serve you divorce papers for 8 months, but you keep running. She also mentioned something about child support enforcement finally tracking you down. The blood drains completely from Richard's face. But the most interesting discovery, I continue, savoring this moment after 3 weeks of carrying this horrible knowledge alone, is how you got to me in the first place. I turn to face my sister, who's suddenly looking very uncomfortable in my stolen wedding dress. Brittany, remember when you kept suggesting that Richard seemed distant? When you offered to talk to him, sister to sister, about wedding stress? When you convinced me he needed space to process his feelings about commitment? Understanding dawns on several faces around the room. You weren't helping me, were you? You were positioning yourself as his confidant, his emotional support during our relationship struggles. Struggles that you were actively creating. Brittany's mouth opens and closes like a fish out of water. You've been undermining my relationship with Richard for months, haven't you? Those casual comments about how overwhelmed he seemed, those suggestions that maybe we were moving too fast with the wedding planning. You were systematically planting seeds of doubt while presenting yourself as the understanding sister who really got him. The pieces of family manipulation are falling into place as clearly as the evidence of Richard's crimes. The question is, I say, looking between my sister and my fraudulent fiancé, did you know what he really was when you decided to steal him? Or are you just his next victim? Brittany's face flushes red as my question hangs in the air. The confident mask she's worn all evening finally cracks, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. Of course I didn't know, she snaps, but her voice wavers. How could I possibly know he was, what did you call it? A criminal. Really? I take a step closer and she instinctively moves backward. Because you've been pursuing Richard for months, Brittany. Long before tonight's little performance. Mom quickly moves between us, her protective instincts kicking in for her favorite daughter. Susan, that's enough. You're being unnecessarily cruel to your sister. The automatic defense of Brittany, even now, even with overwhelming evidence of betrayal, ignites something inside me that I've kept buried for 29 years. Cruel. I turn my attention to Mom and she actually takes a step back at the look on my face. Let's talk about cruelty, Mom. Let's talk about your role in all of this. I don't know what you mean, she says, but her voice lacks conviction. 3 weeks ago, when I was struggling with what I'd discovered about Richard, when I was trying to figure out how to handle this situation, I called you. Remember that conversation? Mom's face goes pale. Around us, the extended family members have formed a loose circle, like spectators at an accident scene. You told me I was being paranoid. You said successful men like Richard have complicated pasts and that I should stop digging into things that weren't my business. I pull out my phone and swipe to a voice recording. Actually, your exact words were, maybe you should focus on being the kind of wife a man like that would want to keep. I press play. Mom's voice fills the hall, tinny but clear through my phone speaker. Susan, honey, you're overthinking this. Richard is a catch. Maybe instead of looking for problems, you should be grateful someone like him chose someone like you. The silence that follows is deafening. Several family members exchange uncomfortable glances. Someone like me, I repeat, looking directly at Mom. What exactly did you mean by that? I didn't. That's not how I meant it. How about 2 weeks ago when I mentioned that I was concerned about some financial discrepancies? You told me to stop being so controlling, and suggested I let Richard handle the money decisions because men don't like women who question their judgment. Aunt Carol shifts uncomfortably. Patricia, you didn't actually say that. She did, I confirm. But here's the interesting part. At the same time I was calling Mom for support and advice, Brittany was already making her move on Richard. Isn't that right, Mom? The accusation hangs heavy in the air. Mom's mouth opens and closes without producing sound. Tell them about the coffee date, Mom. Brittany's eyes widen in panic. Susan, don't. 2 weeks ago, Mom invited Richard for coffee. Without me. To get to know him better before the wedding. I look around the room at shocked faces. Except she didn't invite him alone. She invited Brittany too. A little family bonding session that I somehow didn't get invited to. Mom finally finds her voice. It wasn't like that. We just wanted. You wanted what? To give Brittany a chance to charm my fiancé? To see if she could turn his head away from the boring, practical daughter? You're twisting everything, Mom says, but her voice is weak. We were trying to help. Help who? Because it certainly wasn't me. I turn to address the entire room. For weeks I've been getting advice from my mother to give Richard space, to stop being so needy, to let him breathe. Meanwhile, my sister was following that same advice in reverse, making herself available whenever Richard needed someone to talk to. Uncle Frank clears his throat. Patricia, is this true? Frank, it's complicated, Mom says. You don't understand the situation. Then explain it, I challenge. Explain how you encouraged Brittany to pursue my fiancé while telling me to back off and stop being paranoid about his behavior. The room waits for her response. When it comes, it's devastating in its casual cruelty. Brittany is she's always been the prettier one, Susan. More outgoing, more fun. Men naturally gravitate toward her. I thought if Richard was going to stray anyway, at least it would stay in the family. The words hit the room like a physical blow. Several people gasp audibly. Aunt Carol's champagne glass slips from her fingers and shatters on the floor. If he was going to stray anyway, I repeat slowly. So you actively facilitated it. I was protecting you from getting hurt later, Mom insists. Better to find out now than after you were married. By encouraging my sister to steal him? By letting nature take its course. If he really loved you, he wouldn't have been tempted. The victim blaming is so casual, so matter-of-fact that it takes my breath away. This is the woman who raised me, who was supposed to protect me, who should have been in my corner through the most devastating betrayal of my life. Brittany finally finds her voice. Susan, I was helping you. I could see he wasn't really committed. I was saving you from making a huge mistake. Saving me. I laugh and the sound is harsh in the quiet room. You were saving me by wearing my wedding dress and announcing your elopement at my rehearsal dinner? I did you a favor. Brittany's mask is completely gone now, revealing the entitled, selfish person she's always been. He was never really yours anyway. You're too serious for someone like Richard. Too practical. Men like him need someone who can keep up with them. Keep up with them? You mean someone willing to ignore massive red flags? Someone who wouldn't ask inconvenient questions about mysterious business trips and financial irregularities. Someone fun, Brittany snaps. Someone who doesn't turn everything into an investigation. Someone who knows how to just be happy instead of constantly looking for problems. The irony is breathtaking. She thinks she won the prize, completely oblivious to the fact that she's actually the next victim in Richard's pattern. Look around this room, Brittany. I gesture to our extended family, many of whom are staring at her in shock. Look at the evidence I've just presented. Richard is a criminal. He's committed fraud, bigamy, and child abandonment across multiple states. And your response is that you did me a favor by getting involved with him. You're exaggerating, she says, but uncertainty creeps into her voice for the first time. Am I? Richard, tell her about Jennifer. Tell her about Sophia. Richard, who's been silent through this family confrontation, looks like he wants to disappear entirely. His phone has stopped buzzing, but his hands are still shaking. Tell her about the $37,000 you stole from your wife, I continue. Tell her about the child support you owe. Tell her about Maria and Rebecca and the financial devastation you've left in your wake. That's all in the past, Richard mumbles. The past? You're still legally married to Jennifer. You still owe child support. The FBI is still investigating you for interstate fraud. That's very much the present, Richard. I turn back to my sister. And you think you've won something? You think you've rescued the better man? Brittany looks at the wedding dress she's wearing, my dress, and for the first time tonight, doubt flickers across her face. Dad, who's been silent through this entire confrontation, finally speaks up. His voice is quiet, defeated. Patricia, how long has this been going on? Mom turns to him with surprise. What do you mean? The favoritism. The manipulation. How long have you been playing our daughters against each other? It's the first time I've ever heard Dad directly address Mom's treatment of us. After 29 years of silence, he's finally asking the question that needed to be asked decades ago. I haven't been playing anyone against anyone, Mom protests. I love both my daughters equally. No, Dad says firmly. You don't. You never have. And tonight, watching you actively sabotage Susan's relationship to benefit Brittany, I can't pretend not to see it anymore. The room falls silent again. Extended family members who've witnessed years of this dynamic are finally seeing it acknowledged out loud. Cousin Janet, who's been quiet until now, speaks up. Aunt Patricia, we've all seen it. The different expectations, the different consequences. Susan could never get away with half the things Brittany has done over the years. That's not true, Mom says weakly. It is true, Uncle Robert adds quietly. We've all watched it happen. We just never said anything because it wasn't our place. The web of family complicity is finally unraveling, 30 years of silence and enablement exposed in one devastating conversation. The revelation about decades of family complicity hangs heavy in Murphy's hall when Richard's phone suddenly erupts with a different ringtone, not the usual buzz, but an actual call he can't ignore. The sound cuts through the tension like a knife and everyone turns to look at him. He fumbles with the device, his hands shaking so badly he nearly drops it. The caller ID clearly shows a Phoenix area code. After 3 rings he finally answers. Hello. His voice is barely above a whisper. Even from across the room we can hear a woman's voice on the other end, sharp with anger and desperation. Richard's face goes from gray to green. Jennifer, I can explain. He starts, but the voice cuts him off. The one-sided conversation continues for 30 seconds before Richard pulls the phone away from his ear and ends the call with trembling fingers. Who was that? Brittany asks, though from the look on her face she's beginning to understand. Nobody. Richard lies automatically, but his voice cracks on the word. Just work stuff. I step forward, my phone still in hand. That was your wife, wasn't it, Richard? Jennifer Martinez. The kindergarten teacher you abandoned with your daughter. Ex-wife. He corrects desperately. We're divorced. The paperwork just got delayed because of jurisdictional issues between states. Show us the divorce decree, I challenge. Richard's mouth opens and closes like a fish gasping for air. I don't have it with me. It's at my apartment. Convenient. I swipe to another document on my phone. Because according to the Arizona Department of Vital Records, no divorce has been finalized between you and Jennifer Martinez. You're still legally married, which makes your engagement to me and now to Brittany bigamy. The word hangs in the air like a toxic cloud. Brittany instinctively takes a step away from Richard, her hand flying to her throat. Wait, she says slowly. If you're still married to someone else, then what exactly are we doing here? What was all this about eloping? Richard runs his hands through his hair, leaving it disheveled. Sweat stains are visible on his dress shirt despite the cool air conditioning. Brittany, sweetheart, you have to understand. The situation is complicated. Jennifer and I, we were never really compatible. What we have is real. Real. Brittany's voice rises. What we have. We've been together for what, 2 months? And you're still married to someone else. 3 months. Richard corrects automatically, then realizes his mistake. I do the math quickly. 3 months. Which means you started seeing my sister in July. 2 months before you proposed to me. The timeline hits everyone in the room simultaneously. Richard wasn't just cheating on me with Brittany, he was cheating on both of us while still legally married to Jennifer. How many women are you involved with right now? I ask point blank. It's not like that, Richard protests, but his credibility is completely shot. Susan, you have to believe me. What Brittany and I have, it just happened. I never meant for it to go this far. Brittany stares at him with dawning horror. Go this far. You asked me to elope with you tonight. You said you loved me. You said we were soulmates. We are, Richard insists, reaching for her hand. She jerks away from his touch. Brittany, don't let Susan poison what we have. She's just jealous because she couldn't hold on to me. The manipulation attempt is so transparent that several people in the room actually scoff audibly. Hold on to you? I laugh, but there's no humor in it. Richard, I've spent 3 weeks documenting your criminal activity across 4 states. Trust me, I'm not trying to hold on to anything. I swipe to a new screen on my phone, a bank statement from our joint account. Let's talk about those romantic gifts you bought for my sister. The expensive dinners, the weekend getaway to that bed and breakfast in wine country. How did you pay for those, Richard? His face goes pale again. My consulting work has been going really well. Your consulting work that nobody can verify? The business that has no office address, no website, no clients that anyone can actually contact. I show the bank statement to the room. These charges were made on our joint credit card, Richard. The card that's supposed to be for wedding expenses. Brittany grabs the phone to look at the statement herself. Her face transforms as she sees the charges. The restaurant where Richard took her for their first romantic dinner, The boutique hotel where they'd spent last weekend, the jewelry store where he'd bought her the earrings she's wearing right now. You paid for our dates with Susan's money? Her voice is barely a whisper. It's not like that, Richard says desperately. The money situation is temporary. I was going to pay it all back before the wedding. What wedding? I ask sharply. You can't legally marry anyone while you're still married to Jennifer. The annulment will go through any day now. There is no annulment. I interrupt. I called the courthouse in Phoenix yesterday. You never filed for divorce, let alone annulment. Jennifer has been trying to serve you papers for months, but you keep running away. Richard's phone rings again. Same Phoenix area code. This time he doesn't answer, but the sound fills the silent room like an accusation. Brittany is staring at the credit card statement with growing horror. The hotel room last weekend. The one where you said you wanted to make everything official between us. You charged it to your joint account with Susan. Brittany, please. You made love to me in a hotel room that my sister paid for. Her voice is flat, emotionless. While you were still married to another woman. While you were engaged to Susan. The brutal reality of the situation is finally sinking in for everyone in the room. Richard wasn't juggling two relationships. He was managing a complex web of deception involving multiple women across multiple states, all while maintaining a facade of legitimate business success. How much of Richard's supposed success was real? Uncle Frank asks quietly. I pull up another document on my phone. According to the tax returns I found through public record searches, Richard's reported annual income for the past 2 years has been less than $30,000. Everything else, the expensive clothes, the nice car, the lavish dates, was funded by money stolen from the women he was manipulating. Aunt Carol sits down heavily in one of the banquet chairs. He's been living off of other people's money this entire time? Jennifer's savings. Maria's inheritance. Rebecca's credit cards. Our joint account. I look directly at Richard. You're not a successful consultant. You're a professional con artist who targets women for financial gain. Richard makes one last desperate attempt at damage control. Susan, you're taking everything out of context. Yes, I made some mistakes, but what Brittany and I have is different. She seduced me. She pursued me relentlessly. I was trying to find a way to break it off with her and come back to you. The lie is so outrageous that even Mom looks shocked. Brittany's face hardens. I seduced you? You're the one who approached me at the coffee shop. You're the one who said Susan didn't understand you. You're the one who suggested we keep meeting in secret. You were vulnerable, Richard says, switching tactics again. You were jealous of your sister's relationship. I was trying to be a good friend and things got out of hand. The gaslighting attempt falls completely flat. Brittany may be many things, but she's not stupid. She can see the pattern now, the same manipulation techniques he's used on multiple women. You told me Susan was frigid, she says coldly. You said she was controlling and paranoid. You said she didn't appreciate you the way I did. He told Jennifer that his previous girlfriend was mentally unstable, I add. He told Maria that his ex-wife was abusive. Always the victim, always the innocent party being mistreated by unreasonable women. Richard's phone rings a third time. The sound seems to physically pain him now. When he doesn't answer, it goes to voicemail, but we can all hear Jennifer's voice in the brief moment before he quickly silences the device. Answer it, I command. I can't, he whispers. She's going to ruin everything. Everything's already ruined, Brittany says flatly. You ruined it the moment you decided to lie to all of us. Word of tonight's revelations is already spreading beyond Murphy's Hall. I can see Cousin Janet texting on her phone, and Uncle Robert has stepped outside to make a call. In a small town like ours, news travels fast and Richard's carefully constructed reputation is about to crumble completely. The double doors at the back of Murphy's Hall swing open with a soft whoosh, and every head in the room turns toward the sound. A woman stands silhouetted in the doorway, petite, dark-haired, wearing jeans and a simple blue blouse that speaks of practicality over fashion. She carries a thick manila folder against her chest like armor. Jennifer, Richard breathes and the blood drains completely from his face. Jennifer Martinez steps into the room with quiet determination, her eyes scanning the crowd before settling on Richard. There's no dramatic fury in her expression, no theatrical anger. Instead, there's something far more powerful, the focused resolve of a mother who has driven 16 hours straight to protect her child. "Hello, Richard," she says simply. Her voice carries clearly across the silent room. "We need to talk." Richard takes a step backward, bumping into one of the banquet tables. His hands are shaking so badly now that he can barely hold his phone. "Jennifer, this isn't a good time. We're in the middle of a wedding." Jennifer's gaze takes in the decorations, the family gathering, and finally settles on Brittany in the ivory dress. "How interesting. I wasn't aware you'd gotten divorced." The question hangs in the air like a challenge. Every person in the room understands the implication. "We talked about this," Richard says weakly. "The lawyers said." "We never talked about anything," Jennifer interrupts, her voice remaining calm but gaining steel. "You disappeared. One morning I woke up and you were gone. Along with $37,000, my grandmother's wedding ring, and the college fund I'd been building for Sophia since she was born." The name Sophia hits the room like a physical blow. Several people gasp audibly. Brittany's hand flies to her mouth. "You have a daughter?" Aunt Carol asks, looking between Richard and Jennifer. Jennifer opens her manila folder and pulls out a photograph. Even from where I'm standing, I can see it's a school picture of a beautiful little girl with dark curls and Richard's unmistakable green eyes. Sophia Elena Martinez. 4 years old. She starts kindergarten next month. Jennifer's voice wavers slightly when she talks about her daughter, the only crack in her composed facade. She's been asking why her daddy never visits, why he never sends birthday cards, why we had to move out of our apartment and into a one-bedroom place above the laundromat. Richard slumps against the table, unable to meet anyone's eyes. "Jennifer, please. Not here. Not like this. Not here." Jennifer's composure finally shows a flash of anger. "You mean not in front of your new family? Not in front of the woman wearing what I assume is supposed to be your wedding dress?" She turns to address Brittany directly. "I'm sorry to interrupt your celebration, but this man owes my daughter 3 years of child support. $1,700 a month that was supposed to cover her housing, her food, her medical care." Brittany stares at the photograph in Jennifer's hand, her face pale. "Medical care?" "Sophia has asthma," Jennifer explains matter-of-factly. "Severe asthma that requires daily medication and frequent doctor visits. The insurance I can afford through my teaching job covers the basics, but the specialist treatments..." She trails off, then shakes her head. "I've been working 2 jobs for 3 years, trying to cover what Richard was court-ordered to pay." The practical, devastating reality of Richard's abandonment settles over the room like a heavy blanket. This isn't about romantic betrayal or hurt feelings. This is about a child who can't breathe properly because her father chose to spend her medical money on romantic getaways with other women. "I didn't know," Brittany whispers. "I didn't know about any of this." "Of course you didn't," Jennifer says, not unkindly. "Richard is very good at compartmentalizing his lies. I didn't know about Susan until she called me yesterday. I didn't know about Maria in Colorado until the private investigator I hired tracked down his pattern of movement." She pulls more documents from her folder, official-looking papers with court seals. "I've been trying to serve Richard divorce papers for 8 months. His last known address was a P.O. box in Denver that he abandoned 6 months ago. Before that, it was an apartment in Portland that he left in the middle of the night, owing 3 months' rent." Uncle Frank steps forward slightly. "Ma'am, what exactly is the legal situation here?" Jennifer looks at him with appreciation for the direct question. "Richard and I are still legally married. We never divorced because he disappeared before the proceedings could be completed. Any marriage ceremony he participates in would constitute bigamy, which is a federal crime when it crosses state lines." She turns back to Richard, who's now sitting heavily in one of the banquet chairs. "But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because the state of Arizona finally got a lead on your location, and I drove straight through from Phoenix to make sure you couldn't run again before the authorities arrive." Richard's head snaps up. "Authorities? Child support enforcement officers will be here within the hour," Jennifer says calmly. "Crossing state lines to avoid child support payments is a federal offense. So is using false identities to obtain credit, which I understand you've been doing based on what Susan told me about your financial activities here." She pulls out another document. "This is a warrant for your arrest, issued by the state of Arizona 3 months ago. It's been sitting in the system waiting for someone to locate you. The room goes deadly quiet. Richard stares at the warrant as if it might disappear if he concentrates hard enough. I also spoke with Maria Santos yesterday, Jennifer continues. She's flying in from Denver tomorrow morning to file additional charges related to the money you stole from her grandfather's inheritance. And Rebecca Chin from Portland is driving down tonight. Apparently she's been working with a federal prosecutor about your credit card fraud schemes. Each revelation hits like a hammer blow. Richard isn't just a cheating fiancé or a deadbeat father. He's a career criminal with victims across multiple states who are finally connecting to compare notes. Brittany has been silent through Jennifer's methodical presentation, but now she speaks up, her voice barely audible. The money he spent on me, the dates, the hotel rooms, the gifts, was that supposed to be for your daughter? Jennifer looks at her with something like pity. Some of it, yes. The child support payments he's missed over the past 3 months would have covered Sophia's new school clothes, her asthma medications, and the deposit for a better apartment closer to her school. The weight of complicity settles on Brittany's shoulders like a physical burden. She sinks into a chair, still wearing my wedding dress, looking smaller and more fragile than I've ever seen her. I didn't know, she repeats. I thought he was successful. I thought he was divorced. I thought. You thought what you were supposed to think, Jennifer says gently. Richard is very skilled at presenting exactly the image each woman needs to see. He told me his previous girlfriend was mentally unstable. I assume he told you something similar about Susan. Brittany nods miserably. He said she was controlling and paranoid. He told Maria that his ex-wife was abusive, Jennifer continues. He told Rebecca that his business partner was embezzling from their company and he needed time to sort out his finances. Always the victim. Always the innocent party being wronged by unreasonable people. She turns to address the entire room. Ladies and gentlemen, you're looking at a textbook sociopathic con artist. Someone who feels no genuine remorse for the pain he causes, who sees other people as resources to be exploited rather than human beings deserving of honesty and respect. Richard finally speaks, his voice hollow. Jennifer, I never meant for it to go this far. I was going to pay everything back. I was going to make things right. When? Jennifer asks sharply. When were you going to pay back the money you stole from our daughter's college fund? When were you going to start being a father to Sophia? After you finished defrauding your next victims. Her composure cracks slightly, revealing the exhaustion and frustration of 3 years spent struggling alone. I have worked 60-hour weeks for 3 years, Richard. I teach first grade during the day and clean office buildings at night. I haven't bought myself new clothes in 18 months because every spare penny goes to Sophia's medical needs. Meanwhile, you've been living like a king on money stolen from the women foolish enough to trust you. The stark contrast between Jennifer's sacrifice and Richard's selfishness fills the room like a toxic cloud. Here stands a woman who has given everything for her child, facing a man who abandoned that same child to fund his own pleasure. Outside Murphy's Hall, I can see flashing lights through the windows. Red and blue getting closer. The red and blue lights grow brighter through Murphy's Hall windows as 2 police cruisers pull into the parking lot. Richard's face goes ashen as he watches the officers approach through the glass doors. That was fast, Jennifer observes, checking her watch. I told them you'd probably try to run again. But Richard doesn't run. He sits frozen in his chair, staring at the legal documents Jennifer has spread across the banquet table like a prosecutor presenting evidence. Outside, I can see Officer Martinez, no relation to Jennifer, despite the shared surname, speaking into his radio while his partner heads toward the building's entrance. Richard Thomas Mitchell? Officer Martinez's voice carries authority as he enters the hall. We have a warrant for your arrest issued by the state of Arizona. The room falls silent except for Mom's sharp intake of breath. Several family members pull out their phones and I can see them frantically texting. In a town of 12,000 people, news travels at lightning speed, and tonight's drama is about to become tomorrow's headline in the local newspaper. On what charges? Uncle Frank asks, his legal background making him step forward as an unofficial advocate. Failure to pay court-ordered child support, crossing state lines to avoid financial obligations and identity fraud, Officer Martinez reads from his paperwork. Additional federal charges may be filed pending investigation by the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division. As Richard is read his rights, his phone, which has been buzzing constantly, starts ringing again. This time it's not Jennifer calling but someone else entirely. Officer Martinez answers it as evidence. Richard Mitchell's phone, he says professionally. The voice on the other end is loud enough that several people nearby can hear it, a man's voice, angry and demanding to know where Richard is. Who am I speaking with? Officer Martinez asks, pulling out a notebook. Tom Bradley from Bradley Construction, the voice says. Mitchell owes us $47,000 for the downtown renovation project. He was supposed to pay us last month and now his checks are bouncing. Officer Martinez exchanges glances with his partner. Sir, I'm going to need you to contact the district attorney's office tomorrow morning. This is now part of a criminal investigation. As the call ends, I see understanding dawn on several faces in the room. Tom Bradley is a respected local contractor, and if Richard owes him nearly $50,000, that means his professional deception goes deeper than just personal relationships. How much money are we talking about? Cousin Janet asks, her phone still in her hand, clearly documenting everything for her social media followers. Jennifer opens another folder. Based on what I've been able to track down with my private investigator, Richard has defrauded at least 6 women across 4 states out of approximately $200,000 over the past 3 years. The number hangs in the air like a bomb. $200,000. That's more than many people in our town make in 5 years. But that's just the individual victims, Jennifer continues. Susan mentioned he's been using fake business credentials here locally. If he's been taking deposits or payments for services he never intended to provide. She doesn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone understands the implications. As Richard is led away in handcuffs, Brittany finally speaks up. What happens now? To me, I mean. Am I in trouble too? Officer Martinez turns to her with professional compassion. Ma'am, if you were unaware of Mr. Mitchell's criminal activities and married status, you're considered another victim. However, we'll need you to provide a statement about your relationship and any financial transactions between you. The word victim hits Brittany hard. She spent the entire evening believing she was the victor in some romantic competition, only to discover she's actually the latest mark in a criminal enterprise. My phone buzzes with a text from my boss at the county clerk's office. Susan, is it true what they're saying about Richard? Channel 8 News just called asking about marriage records. The media attention is starting. Within hours, Richard's arrest will be local news, and by tomorrow morning, it'll be a cautionary tale about online dating and financial fraud that gets picked up by regional outlets. Mrs. Patterson from the bank is here, Aunt Carol announces, looking toward the entrance where Murphy's Hall's owner is speaking with an older woman I recognize immediately. Mrs. Patterson approaches with the grim expression of someone delivering bad news. Susan, dear, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we've had several business accounts request holds on payments to Richard Mitchell's consulting firm. When word got out about tonight. She trails off delicately. How many accounts? I ask. 7 so far, totaling about $90,000 in contracts and deposits. Mrs. Patterson's voice is gentle but firm. The bank board is meeting tomorrow morning to discuss potential liability for any loans or credit lines we extended based on Mr. Mitchell's fraudulent financial statements. Brittany looks stricken. How did this become so big so fast? Small town, Jennifer explains matter-of-factly. Everyone knows everyone. When something like this happens, word spreads through every social circle, every business network, every church congregation within hours. He's right. I can see it happening in real time as family members text updates, as Mrs. Patterson takes calls from other concerned business owners, as cousin Janet livestreams updates to her Facebook followers. Janet, turn that off, Mom says sharply, but her voice lacks its usual authority. For the first time in years, people aren't automatically deferring to her wishes. Why? Janet challenges. This is news, Aunt Patricia. People need to know what happened here tonight. Because it's family business, Mom insists. Family business? Uncle Robert speaks up, his voice heavy with years of accumulated frustration. Patricia, you actively facilitated this mess. You encouraged Brittany to pursue Susan's fiancé, then tried to cover it up when everything fell apart. This stopped being private family business the moment you decided to publicly humiliate one daughter to benefit the other. The criticism hits Mom like a physical blow. She's always been the matriarch, the woman whose opinions carried weight at family gatherings. Now her own brother is calling her out in front of everyone. I was trying to protect Susan, she says weakly. No, I interject firmly. You were protecting your image. You couldn't stand the idea that your precious Brittany might be seen as second choice, so you orchestrated a situation where she could steal what was mine and make it look like fate. The truth settles over the room uncomfortably. Several relatives who've witnessed years of this dynamic are finally seeing it called out directly. Susan's right, Cousin Michael says quietly. He's always been the peacemaker, the one who avoids confrontation. Aunt Patricia, we've all watched you favor Brittany since they were kids. Tonight just made it impossible to ignore anymore. It's not favoritism, Mom protests, but her voice cracks. I love both my daughters equally. Then why, asks Aunt Sarah, Dad's sister, did you let Brittany take Susan's wedding dress without asking? Why did you encourage Richard to spend time with Brittany while telling Susan to give him space? Mom has no answer. The evidence of her manipulation is too clear, too well documented by tonight's events. I think, Dad says quietly, speaking up for only the second time tonight, we need to have some serious family conversations after everyone's had time to process what happened here. It's the closest thing to a rebuke he's ever given Mom publicly, and the shock on her face shows she understands the significance. My phone buzzes again. This time it's a friend from high school who now works at the local newspaper. Susan, I'm so sorry about everything. Do you want to give a statement for tomorrow's paper? We want to make sure your side gets told accurately. The offer is tempting, but I shake my head. Not yet. Maybe after the legal situation gets sorted out. Jennifer overhears and nods approvingly. Smart choice. Let the criminal charges speak for themselves first. The media attention will die down once people realize this is really about fraud and child abandonment, not romantic drama. Outside, more cars are arriving. I recognize several vehicles, neighbors, co-workers, even the pastor from our church. Word has spread beyond family and people are coming to see the aftermath for themselves. Murphy's Hall has become the center of the biggest scandal our small town has seen in decades, and everyone wants to witness the fallout firsthand. The crowd gathered outside Murphy's Hall begins to thin as the evening grows late, but the conversations continue in hushed clusters. I watch from the window as neighbors and community members process what they've witnessed, the complete unraveling of a man they'd believed to be a successful businessman, the exposure of a family's toxic dynamics, and the arrest that will likely dominate local headlines for weeks to come. Susan. Jennifer's voice draws my attention back to the hall's interior. She's packing her documents back into the manila folder, but she pauses to look at me directly. Thank you. For calling me, for giving me the chance to finally face him. I wasn't sure I'd ever get this opportunity. I shake my head. You don't need to thank me. You're the one who drove 16 hours and brought the evidence that sealed his fate. We both did what we had to do, she says simply. The difference is you chose to act before he could hurt you the way he hurt me. Brittany, still wearing my wedding dress but looking nothing like the confident bride who'd announced her elopement hours earlier, approaches us hesitantly. Her mascara has smudged, leaving dark circles under her eyes, and the ivory silk that had seemed so radiant now appears rumpled and out of place. Jennifer. Her voice is small, uncertain. Can I ask you about Sophia? Jennifer's expression softens slightly. What would you like to know? Is she okay? I mean, with her asthma and everything. Brittany's question comes out in a rush. The money Richard spent on me, the money that was supposed to be for her medical care, how much damage did that cause? It's the first truly selfless question I've heard my sister ask in years. Jennifer seems to recognize this too, because her response lacks the edge it had carried earlier. She's managing, Jennifer says carefully. I've been able to keep up with her basic medications, and the school nurse has been incredibly helpful. But there are some specialist treatments she needs that we've had to postpone because of cost. Brittany pulls out her phone and opens her banking app. I don't have much, but I have some savings. About $4,000. Would that help? I know it doesn't make up for anything, but... The offer hangs in the air. Jennifer looks surprised by the gesture, and frankly so am I. This kind of immediate, practical generosity is completely unlike the sister I grew up with. You don't have to do that, Jennifer says gently. You were a victim too. No, Brittany says firmly. I was willfully blind. I chose not to ask questions when things didn't add up because I liked the attention, liked feeling special. A 4-year-old girl shouldn't have to suffer because of my selfishness. She transfers the money on her phone, showing Jennifer the confirmation screen. It's not enough, but it's a start. Jennifer accepts the phone and copies down the transaction details. Thank you. This will cover Sophia's next 3 specialist appointments. The interaction marks a shift in Brittany that I never expected to see. For the first time in our lives, she's putting someone else's needs before her own gratification. Brittany, I say quietly, drawing her attention. We need to talk. Not tonight, not here, but soon. She nods, tears forming in her eyes. I know. I have a lot to apologize for. A lot to figure out about myself. Dad appears beside us, looking older than he had at the beginning of the evening. The stress of watching his family implode in public has taken a visible toll. Girls, I think we should head home. Let people process what happened tonight. As we begin gathering our belongings, Pastor Williams enters the hall. He's a kind man in his 60s who's known our family since Brittany and I were children. His presence draws immediate attention from the remaining family members. I came as soon as I heard, he says, his voice carrying genuine concern. Is everyone all right? Define all right, I say with a weak smile. He approaches with the measured steps of someone accustomed to dealing with family crises. I know tonight has been traumatic for everyone involved. Sometimes situations like this, painful as they are, create opportunities for growth and healing that wouldn't exist otherwise. Mom, who's been silent since her public rebuke by multiple family members, finally speaks up. Pastor, I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to undo the damage I've caused. It's the first time I've ever heard her admit culpability without immediately making excuses or shifting blame. The admission seems to surprise her as much as it does the rest of us. The willingness to acknowledge mistakes is the first step, Pastor Williams says gently. But the real work comes in changing the patterns that created those mistakes in the first place. He turns to address the room. What happened here tonight was devastating, but it also revealed truths that needed to come to light. Sometimes God uses painful circumstances to expose problems that have been festering in darkness. Jennifer, who's been preparing to leave, pauses at his words. I'm not particularly religious, but I've learned that secrets have a way of eating away at everything good until someone has the courage to drag them into the open. Her observation carries weight because it comes from experience. She's lived with the consequences of Richard's deceptions for 3 years. And her perspective adds gravity to the pastor's more abstract spiritual guidance. What happens now? Cousin Janet asks. She's finally put away her phone, recognizing that some moments are too significant for social media documentation. Now we do the hard work, I answer. Richard faces legal consequences. Mom and Brittany and I figure out how to rebuild relationships that were damaged long before tonight. Our family learns how to function without the toxic dynamics that allowed this situation to develop. Dad steps forward, his voice stronger than it's been all evening. I owe everyone here an apology, especially Susan. I've watched problematic behavior for years and said nothing because I was afraid of conflict. My silence enabled the favoritism and manipulation that culminated in tonight's humiliation. The admission is stunning. Dad has spent decades avoiding confrontation, maintaining peace at any cost. To see him finally acknowledge his role in our family's dysfunction represents a seismic shift. We all played a part, Uncle Frank says quietly. Those of us who witnessed the unfair treatment and said nothing because it wasn't our place. We were protecting our own comfort while Susan suffered in isolation. The circle of accountability expands as family members begin acknowledging their complicity in patterns they'd previously ignored. It's uncomfortable but necessary, the kind of reckoning that can either destroy a family completely or provide the foundation for genuine healing. I want to start therapy, Brittany announces suddenly. Real therapy, not just talking to friends or mom. I want to understand why I behaved the way I did, why I felt entitled to take what wasn't mine. The declaration surprises everyone, including me. Brittany has always resisted anything that might suggest she needed to change or improve herself. I think that's wise, Pastor Williams says. Sometimes the most painful experiences teach us the most important lessons about ourselves. Jennifer checks her watch. I should head back to Phoenix. I have to work tomorrow and Sophia is staying with my neighbor. As she prepares to leave, she turns to me one final time. Susan, what you did tonight, the investigation, the courage to expose the truth, you saved other women from going through what we went through. Don't let anyone minimize that. Her words settle into my chest like a warm glow. For months I've questioned my own judgment, wondered if I was being paranoid or controlling. Tonight proved that my instincts were not only correct but potentially life-saving for future victims. Take care of yourself, I tell her. And give Sophia my love even though we've never met. I will, she promises. And Susan, don't let this experience make you afraid to trust again. Not everyone is Richard. As Jennifer leaves, carrying her folder of evidence that finally brought justice to a man who'd evaded consequences for years, I feel something I haven't experienced in months. Hope. The wedding dress incident that began as the worst betrayal of my life has transformed into something else entirely. A catalyst for truth, accountability, and the possibility of authentic relationships built on honesty rather than manipulation. Standing in Murphy's Hall surrounded by the wreckage of lies and the promise of new beginnings, I realize that sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted is the only way to discover what you actually need. If this story of justice and family betrayal had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Jennifer walked into Murphy's Hall with those legal documents, finally bringing Richard to justice. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.
My name is Autumn Wilson, and I'm 27 years old. For years ago, my own mother abandoned me in my wheelchair at the edge of a cliff, leaving me to die. What she didn't count on was my will to survive. The accident had taken my legs, but not my spirit. No one believed my story until the evidence became undeniable. Before I tell you how I went from being abandoned on a cliff edge to standing face to face with my mother years later, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and subscribe to hear more incredible survival stories like mine. Growing up in Portland, Oregon, my life revolved around gymnastics. From the moment I took my first tumbling class at age 5, my mother Stephanie saw potential in me that she was determined to develop. While other kids had playdates and birthday parties, I had practice sessions and competitions. My childhood photo albums weren't filled with family vacations or school events. They documented my progression from local competitions to regional championships. Hire Autumn. Your extension needs to be perfect, my mother would call from the sidelines during practice. She never missed a session, scrutinizing every movement, every position. The other parents would come and go, but Stephanie was a constant presence, clipboard in hand, timing my routines down to the second. By 12, I was training 30 hours a week. When I complained of exhaustion or wanted to attend a friend's sleepover, my mother had a standard response: champions make sacrifices. Do you want to be ordinary or extraordinary? The question wasn't really a question at all. My father, Daniel, had left when I was 8. I remember their arguments often centered around my gymnastics schedule and the mounting expenses. She's a child, Steph, not your project, he'd say. After he left, it was just me and my mother, our lives even more intensely focused on my gymnastics career. The strategy worked, though. By 16, I was competing at level 10, the highest level in the USA Gymnastics Junior Olympics program. College scouts attended my meets, and my mother meticulously tracked every conversation, every potential scholarship offer. UCLA is showing serious interest, she told me after one competition, barely containing her excitement. Their program is top tier. We need to push even harder now. When the scholarship offer from UCLA finally came, my mother cried for the first time I could remember. We did it, Autumn. Everything we sacrificed was worth it. Looking back, I noticed she said "we" a lot when talking about my accomplishments. Moving to Los Angeles at 18 was my first taste of independence. My mother wanted to relocate with me, but even she couldn't justify leaving her job as an accountant. Instead, she called daily, requiring detailed reports about my training, nutrition, and coaches' feedback. During my sophomore year, everything changed when I met Tyler Jackson. He was studying sports medicine and worked part-time with the athletics department. Unlike the intense, competitive world I was used to, Tyler was laid back and found joy in simple things. He taught me to appreciate sunsets and random road trips, experiences I'd never prioritized. "You're more than just a gymnast," he told me one night as we sat on the beach. You know that, right? The question hit me harder than any fall from the balance beam ever had. When I brought Tyler home during spring break, my mother's disapproval was immediate and unrelenting. "He's a distraction," she said after he'd left the room. "I can already see your focus slipping." "I'm maintaining a 3.8 GPA and still competing, Mom," I argued. "Maintaining isn't advancing," she shot back. "You could be team captain next year if you weren't wasting time with him." The tension escalated over the next 2 years. When I decided to move in with Tyler after graduation, my mother stopped speaking to me for 2 months. She finally called on my birthday, but the conversation quickly deteriorated. "So you're throwing away everything we worked for to play house with a boy? What about your coaching opportunities? What about the Olympic training center contacts we made?" "Those are still possibilities, Mom. I'm just living my life too." "I didn't sacrifice everything for you to become mediocre," she said, her voice ice cold. Despite her opposition, I moved forward with my plans. Tyler and I found a small apartment near the training center where I'd accepted a position as an assistant gymnastics coach. The role wasn't as prestigious as the national opportunities my mother had mapped out, but it made me happy. For the first time, I was making decisions based on what I wanted. The last time I saw my mother before the accident was at a coffee shop near my apartment. I'd hoped for reconciliation, but she arrived armed with a folder full of career opportunities one was missing and statistics about how relationships at my age rarely lasted. "You need to wake up, Autumn. This fantasy life you're building will collapse, and then what?" "Then I'll figure it out, Mom. That's what adults do." Her face hardened as she gathered her belongings. "You'll regret choosing him over me. When this all falls apart, don't expect me to pick up the pieces." I watched her walk away, never imagining how prophetic her words would become, or how differently they would play out than either of us could have anticipated. Rain hammered against the windshield as Tyler and I drove home from dinner with friends. It was just past midnight on a Friday in November, 6 months after graduation. The coastal highway curved along the Pacific, usually offering breathtaking views, but that night visibility extended barely beyond our headlights. "Maybe we should pull over until this lets up," I suggested, watching Tyler's knuckles whiten as he gripped the steering wheel. "We're almost home," he reassured me. "Just another 15 minutes. Those 15 minutes never came. Headlights suddenly appeared in our lane, aimed directly at us. A driver had attempted to pass on the curve, misjudging the distance in the downpour. Tyler swerved right to avoid collision, but our tires lost traction on the rain-slicked road. Time slowed as our car broke through the guardrail. I remember the weightless sensation as we became airborne, Tyler's hand reaching for mine, and his voice shouting my name. Then came the violent impact as we rolled down the embankment, metal twisting, glass shattering. My world exploded in pain, then darkness. I woke to rhythmic beeping and the antiseptic smell of hospital. A nurse noticed my open eyes and called for the doctor. Their expressions told me everything before they said a word. "Tyler?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The doctor, a woman with kind eyes and gray-streaked hair, took my hand. "I'm so sorry, Autumn. He didn't survive the impact." The physical pain of my injuries paled against the tidal wave of grief. Tyler was gone. The future we'd planned evaporated in an instant. The medical details came later. T10 complete spinal cord injury. Paralysis from the waist down. Multiple surgeries. Uncertain prognosis. The words floated around me, meaningless against my loss. "Will I walk again?" I finally asked on the 3rd day. "It's a complete injury," the neurologist explained. "The chances are very low, but rehabilitation can help you adapt and lead an independent life." Independent. The word seemed hollow when I couldn't even sit up without assistance. On my 5th day in the hospital, my mother appeared in the doorway. For a moment, she seemed like a stranger, smaller and older than I remembered from just months before. "Oh, Autumn, she whispered, approaching tentatively. My poor girl. Despite our strained relationship, I broke down in her arms. She held me as I cried for Tyler, for my legs, for the life I'd lost. In that moment of vulnerability, I was grateful for her presence. I'm moving in to help you, she announced the following day. I've already given notice at work. You'll need full-time care when you're discharged. Too overwhelmed to argue, I nodded. The logistics of my new reality were terrifying. My apartment wasn't wheelchair accessible. My job required physical demonstrations I could no longer perform. My savings wouldn't cover the mounting medical bills. I'll take care of everything, my mother promised, stroking my hair like she had when I was small. You just focus on getting stronger. For the first few weeks after discharge, her care seemed genuine. She transformed my apartment, rearranging furniture for wheelchair access, installing grab bars in the bathroom, researching adaptive equipment. She attended every doctor's appointment, taking detailed notes and asking pointed questions. We'll get through this, became her mantra. We're fighters, you and I. But subtle shifts began as weeks turned into months. My mother's initially encouraging tone during physical therapy sessions gradually changed. Don't push yourself too hard, she'd caution when I wanted to try something challenging. The doctor said you need to accept your limitations. The doctor had said no such thing. When friends from the gym tried to visit, my mother often claimed I was too tired or medicated to see them. Autumn needs calm and routine right now, she'd tell them. Too much stimulation is detrimental to her recovery. Isolated and dependent, I felt my world shrinking to the confines of my apartment, with my mother as gatekeeper. Meanwhile, the financial strain grew crushing. Insurance covered only a portion of my medical expenses, and my coaching position had been permanently filled during my absence. I've applied for disability benefits, my mother informed me one evening. And I'm managing your insurance settlement from the accident. What settlement? I asked, realizing I'd signed papers in the hospital, but recalled few details. The other driver was uninsured, but your policy had coverage for that. It's not much, but it will help with expenses. She changed the subject before I could ask for specifics. As my physical condition stabilized, my emotional state deteriorated. Depression enveloped me like a heavy blanket. Tyler was gone. My career had evaporated. My body felt like a prison. And increasingly, my mother's care felt suffocating rather than supportive. Maybe I should look into adaptive sports programs, I suggested one day, seeking purpose. There's one at the community center that works with former athletes. My mother dismissed the idea immediately. Those programs are for people further along in recovery. You're still too fragile, Autumn. Besides, who would take you there? I'm already stretched thin managing everything. That night, staring at the ceiling, I realized with chilling clarity, my mother didn't want me to recover. My dependence had given her exactly what she'd always wanted, complete control over my life. 6 months after the accident, my existence had become a carefully controlled routine orchestrated entirely by my mother. My once active life had contracted to the dimensions of our apartment, with occasional outings only when she deemed necessary. What had initially seemed like protective care had morphed into something more sinister. Bailey called again, my mother mentioned casually one afternoon, referring to my former gymnastics coach and mentor. I told her you're still not up for visitors. Mom, I've told you I want to see Bailey, I protested. She's been trying to connect for months. And I've told you that you're not ready for the emotional strain, she countered, her voice taking on the patronizing tone I'd grown to hate. Seeing people from your old life will only depress you more. The truth was exactly the opposite. Isolation was feeding my depression, not protecting me from it. Friends and colleagues had gradually stopped calling after repeated rejections. Even my physical therapist had been changed when I requested someone who made fewer demands, a request my mother had made without consulting me. One afternoon while my mother was grocery shopping, I managed to access her laptop. What I discovered sent waves of shock and betrayal through me. Bank statements showed regular transfers from my accounts to hers. The insurance settlement she'd mentioned, a substantial sum of nearly $300,000, had been steadily diminishing through withdrawals that didn't align with my medical expenses. When confronted, My mother didn't even deny it. "Of course I'm using the money," she said with unsettling calm. "Do you think caring for you is free? I gave up my job, my apartment, my entire life to be here. That settlement is payment for my sacrifices." "That money was meant for my long-term care and adaptive equipment," I argued, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I'm going to need it for years, possibly decades." Her laugh was cold. "And who's going to be providing that care? You think some stranger would do what I'm doing out of the goodness of their heart? This arrangement benefits both of us, Autumn. You get the care you need, and I get compensated for providing it." The gaslighting intensified after that confrontation. Items I knew I'd placed within reach would mysteriously move beyond my grasp. Appointments I wanted to attend would be rescheduled without my knowledge. My mother would forget to charge my phone, cutting me off from any outside communication. "Your memory has been affected by the trauma and medication," she would insist when I questioned these incidents. "The doctor mentioned this might happen." I began to doubt my own perceptions, wondering if the accident had indeed affected my cognitive functions. That doubt was exactly what she wanted. In a moment of clarity during a rare solo physical therapy session, my mother had a dental appointment she couldn't reschedule. I confided in my therapist, Lisa. "Is memory loss common with my type of injury?" I asked hesitantly. "Not typically with spinal cord injuries," Lisa replied. "Why do you ask?" That simple question cracked open the door to reality. When I explained the memory issues my mother had attributed to my condition, Lisa's concerned expression confirmed my fears. "Autumn, that sounds more like gaslighting than medical symptoms," she said carefully. "Would you like me to connect you with a counselor who specializes in trauma recovery? Someone separate from your mother's influence." Before I could answer, my mother appeared in the doorway, having arrived early to collect me. The slight narrowing of her eyes told me she'd overheard enough. Lisa was replaced by a new physical therapist the following week. Desperate for help, I managed to send a message to Bailey using a tablet my mother didn't know I had, hidden beneath my mattress when not in use. My former coach responded immediately, offering to help however she could. "Something's very wrong," I wrote. "She's taking my money, isolating me, and I'm afraid of what she might do if she thinks I'm trying to become independent." Bailey promised to come the next day when my mother typically went for groceries. But somehow, my mother discovered the plan. I never learned how. Perhaps she'd been monitoring my devices all along. That evening, she entered my room with a glass of water and my evening medication. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Time for your pain meds, sweetie." "I didn't request any pain medication tonight," I said, suddenly wary. "I'm not in pain. The doctor adjusted your regimen," she replied smoothly. "You need to stay ahead of the pain, remember?" I pretended to take the pills but slipped them under my tongue, spitting them out later when alone. That night, I heard her on the phone in the kitchen. "She's becoming difficult again," my mother was saying. "I think we need to consider more permanent arrangements." "Yes, I know it's drastic, but what choice do I have?" The next morning, my tablet was gone from its hiding place. So was my phone. The landline had been disconnected for non-payment, according to my mother. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded. "Doing what?" "Taking care of my ungrateful daughter who tried to go behind my back." Her mask slipped, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "Did you think I wouldn't find out about Bailey? About your little messages begging for help?" Her boyfriend Mark appeared more frequently after that. A man I'd never met before the accident. He had a shifty demeanor and encouraged my mother's worst behaviors. "She's quite the burden, isn't she?" I overheard him say one night. "All that money tied up in her care when you deserve some happiness too, Steph." My mother's response chilled me to the bone. Something will have to change soon. This situation isn't sustainable. I began to fear for my safety, sleeping fitfully and hiding a kitchen knife under my pillow. The woman who had once pushed me to be extraordinary was now the greatest threat to my existence. 3 weeks after discovering my communication with Bailey, my mother entered my room with an unusually bright smile. "I think we need a change of scenery," she announced. "Let's take a drive along the coast. The fresh air will do you good." Every instinct warned me to refuse, but what choice did I have? I couldn't call for help. I couldn't escape on my own. And a small, desperate part of me hoped that perhaps this gesture indicated a return to normalcy. "That sounds nice," I replied cautiously. "When were you thinking of going?" "Right now," she said, already moving to collect my jacket. "Mark's lending us his car for the day. The weather's perfect." The weather was far from perfect, overcast and windy, typical for the Oregon coast in early spring. As she helped transfer me from the wheelchair to the passenger seat, I noticed a half-empty vodka bottle poorly hidden under the driver's seat. My mother had been drinking more heavily in recent months, often starting before noon. "Should you be driving?" I asked as she slid behind the wheel. She ignored the question, pulling away from the curb with a slight swerve. "I thought we'd drive up to Cape Mears. The view from the cliffs is spectacular." My unease grew as we left Portland behind, heading west toward the coast. My mother maintained an unnerving silence, occasionally taking swigs from a water bottle that clearly didn't contain water. The radio remained off, the only sounds the humming of tires on pavement and the increasing roar of wind as we neared the ocean. Cape Mears was a relatively popular tourist destination, known for its lighthouse and scenic viewpoints. But my mother drove past the main attractions, following a narrow road that wound higher up the headland toward more isolated outlooks. "Where exactly are we going?" I asked, unable to mask the tension in my voice. "Somewhere private," she replied. "Somewhere we can talk without interruptions." She finally pulled into a small gravel turnout near the edge of the cliff. No other cars were present, not surprising given the weather and the off-season timing. The wind had intensified, carrying the first spatters of rain. Dark clouds massed on the horizon, promising a significant storm. My mother cut the engine and sat silently for several minutes, staring out at the churning ocean below. When she finally turned to me, her expression was unnervingly calm. "I've been managing your money very carefully," she began, her words slightly slurred. "Making sure it stretches as far as possible. But even the settlement won't last forever with your ongoing care needs." "I should be involved in those decisions," I said carefully. "It's my future we're talking about." She laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Your future? What future, Autumn? You think you're going to miracle your way out of that chair? You think some knight in shining armor is going to take on the burden of caring for you?" "I'm not a burden," I protested, though years of her conditioning made the words sound hollow even to my own ears. "And I could make progress with the right therapy." "The doctors said." "The doctors said you'll never walk again," she interrupted. "They're just stringing you along to keep billing insurance." "I've been realistic about this situation, even if you haven't." She took another drink, longer this time. "I found the contact information for Bailey in your room. And the knife under your pillow. You don't trust me after everything I've sacrificed for you." "Mom, I'm scared," I admitted, trying to reach whatever maternal instinct might still exist in her. "Your behavior lately, the missing money." "I don't understand what's happening." "What's happening is I'm tired," she said flatly. "Tired of changing adult diapers and being woken up at night. Tired of having no life because my daughter made poor choices and ended up crippled. You chose Tyler over me, and look where that got you." The cruelty of bringing Tyler into this took my breath away. Before I could respond, she continued, her voice now frighteningly methodical. "I've taken what's left of your settlement. About $120,000. Not enough to care for you indefinitely, but enough for me to start over somewhere warm. Mark has connections in Arizona." Horror dawned as I processed her words. "You're planning to leave me? Just abandon me with nothing?" "Not exactly," she said, opening her door and walking around to my side of the car. The wind whipped her hair as she opened my door and began unfastening my seatbelt. "I'm going to free us both." With surprising strength, she pulled my wheelchair from the trunk and roughly transferred me into it. I tried to resist, but months of muscle atrophy had left my upper body weaker than before. She wheeled me toward the cliff edge, stopping about 6 feet from the precipice. "Mom, please," I begged, real terror flooding my system. "You don't want to do this. This isn't you." "This is exactly who I am now," she replied, stepping back from the wheelchair. "Who you made me become." She engaged the brakes on the chair but positioned it facing the cliff edge, on ground that sloped subtly toward the precipice. If the brakes failed or if I moved too suddenly, gravity would do the rest. "The rain's coming in," she observed dispassionately. "They say it'll be quite a storm. Wind gusts up to 60 miles per hour. Enough to blow a lightweight wheelchair right over the edge, I'd imagine." I couldn't believe this was happening. "People will know. They'll look for me. They'll investigate. They'll find a tragic accident," she countered. A depressed, recently disabled young woman who couldn't cope with her losses took a drive to a scenic overlook. A gust of wind, a tragic oversight with the wheelchair brakes. These things happen. She walked back to the car, retrieving her purse. "For what it's worth, I did love you, Autumn. But you should have died in that crash with him. It would have been kinder for both of us." With those final words, she got into the car. The engine started, and without a backward glance, my mother drove away, leaving me alone at the edge of the cliff as the storm approached. Panic engulfed me initially. I screamed until my throat was raw, but the wind carried my voice out to sea where no one could hear. Rain began falling harder, driven horizontally by the strengthening wind. Each gust nudged my chair incrementally closer to the edge. The realization that I might actually die here, alone, cold, and betrayed by the person who should have protected me most, triggered something primal. The competitive spirit that had once driven me to gymnastics championships reignited. If I was going to die, it wouldn't be without fighting for my life with everything I had. I assessed my situation with forced calm. The wheelchair was positioned about 6 feet from the cliff edge. The ground sloped subtly but definitely toward the precipice. The brakes were engaged but might not hold against strong wind gusts. I had no phone, no way to signal for help. Night would fall in approximately 4 hours, and the storm was worsening. Using techniques from my gymnastics days, I began working to shift my weight and the chair away from the edge, inch by excruciating inch. The wheelchair brakes scraped against the gravel, resisting movement. Rain soaked through my clothes, chilling me to the bone. But slowly, painfully, I managed to turn the chair parallel to the cliff edge rather than facing it. By nightfall, I had maneuvered about 10 feet from the precipice, safer but still dangerously exposed to the elements. Using my jacket and the limited mobility in my upper body, I created a makeshift shelter, hunching forward to minimize my exposure to the driving rain. Through that long, terrifying night, I focused on survival. I recited Tyler's favorite poems to stay awake. I remembered coaching techniques for maintaining body heat. I visualized Bailey finding me, refusing to let the image of my own mother's betrayal consume my thoughts. Morning brought no respite from the storm, but it did bring clarity. I wasn't ready to die. Not here, not like this. My mother had taken enough from me, she wouldn't take my future too. Hour 19 of my abandonment brought unexpected salvation. Through the rain, I spotted 2 figures on the hiking trail below. Using the last of my strength, I shouted and waved my arms frantically. By some miracle, they looked up. Mason and Lily Collins, a married couple celebrating their anniversary with an early morning hike despite the weather, became my lifeline. They couldn't reach me directly due to the terrain, but Lily stayed with me while Mason ran to get cell service and call for help. "Hold on," Lily called up to me, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Help is coming. Just hold on." The Coast Guard helicopter arrived 90 minutes later, lowering a rescue technician who secured me before lifting us both to safety. As we rose above the cliff where I'd expected to die, I felt something impossible: hope. The media dubbed it the Cliff Miracle. Local news vans crowded the hospital entrance, reporters desperate for details about the wheelchair-bound woman abandoned in a storm. Police issued an APB for Stephanie Wilson, whose disappearance coincided perfectly with my abandonment. Many didn't believe my story initially. The idea that a mother could leave her disabled daughter to die seemed too monstrous to be true. But evidence mounted quickly. The missing insurance money, witness accounts of my mother's erratic behavior in previous weeks, and most damning, surveillance footage from a gas station showing her and Mark counting cash before heading south on I-5 toward California. Detective Andrea Hayes was assigned to my case. Unlike others who approached with skepticism, she believed me from our first interview. "I've worked family crimes for 15 years, she told me. Nothing about human cruelty surprises me anymore. Physical recovery came first. 19 hours of exposure had resulted in hypothermia, pneumonia, and pressure sores that required intensive treatment. The hospital placed a security guard outside my room, partly for my protection, partly because my story had attracted unwanted attention from media and curiosity seekers. Bailey arrived the day after my rescue, her face streaked with tears as she took in my condition. I should have come sooner. I knew something was wrong. You couldn't have known how wrong, I assured her. No one could have predicted this. As my physical condition stabilized, the emotional aftermath hit with full force. Nightmares plagued my sleep. Panic attacks struck without warning. The dual traumas of Tyler's death and my mother's betrayal left psychological wounds deeper than any physical injury. 2 weeks after my rescue, Dr. Jordan Carter entered my life. As the hospital's specialist in spinal cord rehabilitation, he reviewed my case with particular interest. Your previous therapy was concerning, he said during our first meeting, flipping through my medical records with a furrowed brow. The approach was unusually conservative, almost regressive. Who supervised your treatment? My mother, I replied simply. Understanding dawned in his eyes. Well, Ms. Wilson, I'd like to propose an entirely different approach, if you're willing. Dr. Carter explained that certain incomplete spinal cord injuries sometimes showed unexpected improvement with aggressive physical therapy and experimental treatments. While he cautioned against false hope, he also refused to accept that my condition was permanent without exploring every option. Your gymnast background gives you exceptional body awareness and upper body strength, he noted. That's an advantage many patients don't have. I'd like to enroll you in a clinical trial using electrical stimulation combined with intensive physical therapy. For the first time since the accident, someone was offering possibility instead of limitation. When do we start? I asked. The next day, I met Lisa Martinez, the physical therapist assigned to my case. Unlike my previous therapists who had treated me with kid gloves, at my mother's insistence, I now realized Lisa pushed me to my limits and beyond. I don't care that you can't feel your legs, she said during our first grueling session. Your brain needs to remember they exist. We're going to remind it every single day until something changes. Progress came in microscopic increments. The first breakthrough happened 3 weeks into treatment, a tingling sensation in my right big toe during electrical stimulation. Dr. Carter cautioned it might be phantom sensation, but repeated tests confirmed actual nerve response. It's like waking up from a deep sleep, I tried to explain to Bailey during one of her regular visits. Not enough to move anything yet, but enough to know something's still there. While my body fought to recover, Detective Hayes continued building the case against my mother. Bank records showed Stephanie had emptied my accounts before fleeing. The insurance company confirmed she had falsified documents to gain control of my settlement. Even my apartment, which I'd believed was rented in my name, had been transferred to her through forged paperwork. She was planning this for months, Hayes explained during an update. The cliff wasn't a spontaneous decision. It was the culmination of a calculated plan. The manhunt expanded when evidence suggested my mother and Mark had crossed into Canada. Their trail went cold in Vancouver, where they had apparently acquired new identification documents. 3 months after the cliff incident, Bailey offered me a lifeline, a room in her home, specially adapted for my needs. The insurance company is releasing funds directly to you now that the fraud has been documented, she explained. It won't replace everything that was stolen, but it's enough to cover medical expenses and adaptive equipment. Moving in with Bailey marked the beginning of true recovery. Her home became my sanctuary, a place free from fear and manipulation. As weeks turned into months, I slowly reclaimed pieces of myself that had been suppressed under my mother's control. The experimental treatment continued showing promising results. 6 months after beginning the program, I experienced my first voluntary muscle contraction below the injury site, a slight but unmistakable movement in my right quadriceps. This doesn't mean you'll walk again, Dr. Carter cautioned, though I could see excitement behind his professional reserve. But it does mean your injury may not be as complete as initially diagnosed. I'll take any progress, I replied, watching in wonder as my leg twitched slightly in response to my concentrated effort. Even if it's just this, it's more than I was told was possible. Hope is a powerful catalyst for healing. As sensation and minimal movement gradually returned to my legs, my psychological recovery accelerated as well. Working with trauma specialist Dr. Ramirez, I began processing not just the Cliff betrayal, but the lifetime of manipulation that had preceded it. Your mother's behavior fits the pattern of narcissistic personality disorder with sociopathic tendencies, Dr. Ramirez explained during one session. The control she exerted over your gymnastics career wasn't nurturing, it was about fulfilling her own needs through your achievements. Understanding the psychological dynamics didn't excuse what she'd done, but it helped me contextualize a lifetime of memories. The excessive control, the isolation from peers, the dismissal of my own desires. These weren't expressions of maternal devotion, but symptoms of a profound pathology. 1 year after the Cliff incident, I made a decision that changed the trajectory of my recovery. Using the online platform Bailey helped me create, I shared my story publicly for the first time. The video, simply titled Surviving, detailed both the accident and my mother's betrayal. I expected skepticism. Instead, I received an outpouring of support. Other survivors of family trauma reached out. People with spinal cord injuries shared their own recovery journeys. The isolation that had been enforced by my mother dissolved as I connected with a community of people who understood various aspects of my experience. The video's unexpected virality also generated tips about my mother's whereabouts. Detective Hayes received reports of sightings across British Columbia, though none produced concrete leads. The case remained active, but as months passed without her capture, I made a conscious decision to focus on my future rather than my mother's fate. That future grew increasingly promising. The experimental treatment continued yielding results that defied initial prognosis. By the 18-month mark, I could stand briefly with support. By month 20, I took my first halting steps using parallel bars. "Your case is remarkable," Dr. Carter admitted during an evaluation. "The combination of the treatment protocol, your athletic background, and your sheer determination is creating results we rarely see with injuries of this severity." His clinical assessment couldn't capture the emotional magnitude of those first steps. Each wobbly movement represented not just physical progress, but a reclamation of everything my mother had tried to take from me: my independence, my future, my will to live. As my body grew stronger, so did my voice. What began as a single video evolved into regular updates on my recovery journey. I started a support group for survivors of family trauma, creating the community I had needed during my darkest days. When a local news station featured my story on the 2-year anniversary of the Cliff incident, I received an invitation to speak at a conference on trauma recovery. Standing at that podium, supported by forearm crutches, but standing nonetheless, I faced my largest audience yet. "Trauma doesn't define us," I told them. "How we rise from it does." In the audience, Dr. Carter watched with obvious pride. Our professional relationship had gradually evolved into friendship, his belief in my recovery potential never wavering even when progress plateaued. The warmth in his eyes as I spoke hinted at feelings that mirrored my own growing attraction, a connection neither of us had yet acknowledged, but both increasingly recognized. As my public platform grew, so did the pressure on the investigation. New tips about my mother's whereabouts came in regularly, though most led nowhere. Then, nearly 3 years after her disappearance, a significant break, Mark's abandoned car was discovered near a hiking trail in northern British Columbia. An apparent suicide note on the dashboard claiming both he and Stephanie had walked into the wilderness to end their lives. "Do you think they're really dead?" I asked Detective Hayes when she delivered the news. "The note and abandoned vehicle follow the typical pattern for wilderness suicide," she replied. "But without bodies, we can't close the case. We'll keep looking, but honestly, resources will be diverted to active investigations now." The news left me with complicated emotions. If my mother was indeed dead, justice would remain incomplete. Yet the possibility of closure, of never having to fear her reappearance in my life, offered its own form of relief. That evening, sitting on Bailey's porch watching the sunset, I made a decision that felt like true freedom. Whether she's alive or dead doesn't matter anymore, I told Bailey. I'm not going to let her ghost control my life any more than she did. Bailey squeezed my hand. That's the strongest thing I've ever heard you say. And it was true. In the depths of my darkest night on that cliff, I had found a strength I never knew existed, a strength that would carry me forward, regardless of whether my mother ever faced legal justice for what she'd done. The 2-year mark after the cliff incident passed with a celebration I never could have imagined during those dark hours in the storm. Friends gathered at Bailey's home, not to commemorate my survival, but to celebrate my progress. Using forearm crutches, I walked across the living room unassisted, each step a victory against the prognosis that had once sentenced me to a lifetime of immobility. To autumn, Bailey toasted, raising her glass. Who taught us all that impossible is just a word doctors use when they lack imagination. Dr. Carter, Jordan, as I'd come to call him outside our now weekly therapy sessions, laughed along with the others, but his eyes held something deeper when they met mine. The professional boundaries between us had gradually softened as my recovery progressed, though neither of us had yet acknowledged the growing connection. The experimental treatment program had expanded based partly on my case results. Electrical stimulation combined with intensive physical therapy was showing promising outcomes for other patients with similar injuries. I'd become something of an unofficial ambassador for the program, documenting my journey online and speaking at medical conferences about my experience. The clinical trial directors want you to consider a more formal role, Jordan mentioned as the party wound down. Patient advocate for the next phase of research. Your story is powerful, Autumn. It gives hope to people who've been told there is none. That proposal marked the beginning of a new chapter. Working alongside medical professionals who once treated me, I found purpose in translating complex protocols into accessible information for new patients. My background in coaching proved unexpectedly valuable. The skills used to guide young gymnasts transferred naturally to encouraging spinal cord injury patients through grueling therapy sessions. My living situation evolved as well. After 2 years with Bailey, I was ready for independence. The insurance settlement that remained after my mother's theft, combined with speaking fees and a part-time position with the research program, allowed me to rent a small accessible apartment near the rehabilitation center. You don't have to move out, Bailey insisted as I packed. This has been good for both of us. It has, I agreed, hugging my former coach who had become family in every way that mattered. But I need to know I can do this. That she didn't take that from me too. The move marked a psychological milestone as significant as my physical progress. Adapting to life alone presented challenges, but each obstacle overcome reinforced my independence. Simple achievements, cooking dinner without assistance, navigating public transportation with my mobility aids, managing my own medical appointments, built confidence that spilled into every aspect of my recovery. My social media following grew as I documented these seemingly mundane victories. What began as personal therapy evolved into a platform reaching thousands of people facing similar challenges. Comments poured in from others with spinal cord injuries, from trauma survivors, from people simply inspired by witnessing resilience in action. You never sugarcoat the hard days, one follower commented. That's what makes the good days believable. I made a conscious decision to be transparent about the ongoing struggles. The chronic pain that medication only partially addressed. The days when depression made getting out of bed seem impossible. The phantom sensation of Tyler beside me that sometimes woke me in the night. Healing wasn't linear, and pretending otherwise would dishonor both my journey and those following it. Through it all, Jordan's presence in my life remained constant. Our professional relationship had officially ended when I joined the research team as an advocate rather than a patient, removing the ethical barriers that had kept us in strictly defined roles. Would you like to have dinner sometime? He asked after a team meeting, the slight crack in his typically confident voice betraying nervousness. Not at the hospital cafeteria, I mean. An actual restaurant. Just us. The question triggered unexpected panic. Since Tyler's death, I'd closed that part of myself off, unsure if I could ever risk that kind of loss again. Jordan must have seen the fear in my expression. It's okay to say no, he added quickly. Our friendship is valuable to me regardless. It's not a no, I clarified. It's more of a I'm not sure I remember how. His smile returned. Fortunately, I'm certified in rehabilitation. We can figure it out together. That first date was awkward in the most wonderful way. We'd known each other for 2 years in a clinical setting, yet discovering each other outside those parameters felt like meeting for the first time. Jordan spoke about his childhood in Michigan, his decision to specialize in spinal cord rehabilitation after his brother's motorcycle accident, his terrible cooking skills, but excellent taste in music. I shared stories about my gymnastics days, carefully edited to focus on the joy of the sport rather than my mother's manipulation. You never mentioned Tyler, Jordan observed as he walked me to my door. I understand if it's too painful, but I want you to know it's okay to talk about him if you want to. The simple acknowledgement broke something open. Standing in my doorway, I told Jordan about Tyler's laugh, his terrible puns, his dream of opening a sports medicine clinic for underprivileged athletes. For the first time, I spoke about Tyler without the shadow of my mother's betrayal darkening the memories. Thank you, I said as I finished, for making space for him in this. He's part of your story, Jordan replied simply. Just as your injury is part of mine through different circumstances. We don't leave the people we've loved behind when we move forward. As our relationship deepened, so did my involvement with the spinal cord research community. 3 years after the cliff incident, I was invited to give a TEDx talk about neuroplasticity and recovery. Standing on that red circle, supported by a single cane rather than the forearm crutches I'd needed months earlier, I shared my journey from medical catastrophe to medical collaboration. The human spirit and the human nervous system have something remarkable in common, I told the audience. They both possess a capacity for adaptation that defies expectation. They both can forge new pathways when old ones are destroyed. And they both thrive when we refuse to accept artificial limitations placed upon them. The talk went viral, expanding my platform beyond the medical community to a broader audience. Interview requests flooded in. Publishers approached with book deals. The attention was overwhelming, but provided opportunities to advocate for research funding and insurance reform for spinal cord injuries. Amid this professional whirlwind, my personal life reached a crossroads. Jordan and I had been dating for nearly a year, our relationship growing stronger despite the complications of our intertwined professional worlds. One evening after a particularly grueling day of media appearances, he suggested a drive to the coast, a proposal that initially triggered painful flashbacks. We don't have to, he backtracked, seeing my expression. It was just a thought. No, I decided. I'd like that. I can't let fear of the ocean stay with me forever. The beach he chose was nothing like the clifftop where my mother had abandoned me. Accessible boardwalks led to viewing areas where we watched the sunset over gentle waves. As the horizon blazed with color, Jordan turned to me with uncharacteristic seriousness. I had a whole speech planned, he admitted, about how you've shown me what courage really means, how you've made me a better doctor and a better person. But standing here, all of that feels inadequate. When he knelt awkwardly in the sand beside my seated position, I felt my heart stutter. Autumn Wilson, will you marry me? He asked, presenting a ring that caught the last rays of sunset. Not because either of us needs the other, but because I can't imagine walking through life with anyone else beside me. Yes, I answered without hesitation. Yes to all of it. That evening, back at my apartment, I received a call from Detective Hayes, the first in nearly 6 months. We found Mark, she said without preamble, alive in a small town outside Toronto. He was trying to use one of the fake IDs we've been tracking. My hand tightened around the phone. And my mother? No sign of her. Mark claims they separated over a year ago after arguments about money. He says she headed west, possibly to Vancouver Island, but we're treating his information with skepticism given his previous deceptions. The news should have disrupted my happiness, but surprisingly, it didn't. Whether my mother was alive or dead, captured or free, no longer defined my existence. The power she had held over me, first through manipulation, then through fear, had dissolved through my own reclamation of self. Thank you for letting me know, I told Hayes. Please keep me updated, but I want you to know I'm okay either way. As our wedding approached, Jordan and I made a decision that surprised many but felt right to us. Rather than a traditional ceremony, we would marry at the rehabilitation center, surrounded by the patients and colleagues who had been integral to our journey together. The symbolism felt perfect, celebrating new beginnings in the place where so many fought to reclaim their lives. For years after being abandoned on that cliff, I walked down the aisle unassisted, my gait still imperfect but unmistakably mine. Jordan waited at the altar, his eyes reflecting amazement not at my walking. He had witnessed every step of that progress, but at the journey that had brought us to this moment. As we exchanged vows, I glanced at the gathered witnesses, Bailey in the front row, tears streaming unashamedly, Dr. Ramirez who had guided my psychological healing, patients I'd worked with who had become friends, even Detective Hayes, who had continued the search long after departmental resources had been redirected. I promise to walk beside you, I told Jordan, the double meaning clear to everyone present, through whatever storms life brings our way. Later that evening, as celebration continued around us, Jordan asked, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if your mother hadn't left you on that cliff?" I considered the question carefully. I'd probably still be in that wheelchair, believing I'd never improve. I'd still be under her control, my settlement money drained, my spirit broken. As terrible as that night was, it forced me to find strength I never knew I had. "You always had it," he corrected gently. "You just never needed it until then." Perhaps he was right. The cliff had not created my resilience. It had merely revealed it, like fire exposing the true nature of gold. With Jordan beside me, I looked toward our future, one that now included plans to start the adoption process. Having faced my own childhood trauma, I felt called to provide the nurturing home I'd never truly had. Our application highlighted our medical backgrounds and personal experience with overcoming adversity, strengths we believed would serve adoptive parenting well. The media continued following my story, but increasingly I directed attention toward the research foundation we had established to fund experimental treatments for spinal cord injuries. My platform became a megaphone for others whose voices had been silenced by disability or trauma, exactly the opposite of what my mother had intended when she left me to die alone. For years after that stormy night, I had transformed from victim to advocate, from patient to partner, from someone defined by what had been taken from me to someone characterized by what I had reclaimed. The wheelchair remained part of my life for longer distances, but it had become a tool rather than a prison. One mobility option among many rather than the sentence my mother had proclaimed it to be. My story had not ended on that cliff's edge. It had, in many ways, only just begun. For years and 3 months after the cliff incident, life had settled into a rhythm I never thought possible during those dark days. My walking continued improving through persistent therapy, though I still used a cane for stability and a wheelchair for longer distances. Jordan and I had transformed a small ranch house into an accessible home, complete with a therapy room where I both continued my own exercises and occasionally worked with private clients. My career had evolved in unexpected directions. What began as patient advocacy had expanded into motivational speaking, disability consulting for corporations, and co-authoring research papers on neuroplasticity and trauma recovery. The book I'd hesitated to write was now in its final editing stages, scheduled for publication in the spring. Most significantly, our adoption application had been approved. We were in the matching phase, attending workshops and preparing our home while waiting for the call that would change our family forever. "Do you think you're ready?" Dr. Ramirez asked during one of our now monthly sessions. "To be a mother, I mean." The question gave me pause. "I know what a mother shouldn't be," I replied carefully. "And I've been blessed with examples of what caregivers should be, Bailey, Jordan, even you. I think that's a good foundation." On a crisp autumn morning, the calm we'd built was disrupted by an unexpected visitor. I was reviewing manuscript edits when the doorbell rang. Jordan was at the hospital, so I made my way to the entrance, assuming it was a package delivery. Instead, I found a man I vaguely recognized but couldn't immediately place, older, weathered, with nervous eyes that darted past me to scan the interior of our home. "Autumn Wilson," he asked, though it clearly wasn't a question. "You probably don't remember me." "I'm Mark Daniels." The name hit like a physical blow. Mark, my mother's boyfriend who had encouraged her worst instincts, who had fled with her after the cliff incident, who had been arrested in Toronto 6 months earlier and was supposedly awaiting trial. "You shouldn't be here," I said, my hand instinctively tightening on my cane. "There's a restraining order." I know, he said hurriedly, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I made bail last month and I've been thinking about everything. About what Stephanie did. What we did." "You need to leave before I call the police," I replied, reaching for my phone. "Whatever confession you're looking for, I'm not the person to give it." "She's alive," he blurted. "Your mother. She's living on Vancouver Island under the name Claire Bennett. Has been for almost 3 years now." My finger hovered over the emergency call button. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because the trial starts next month, and I'm looking at serious time," he admitted with surprising candor. "Accessory after the fact, fraud, identity theft, the list goes on. But Stephanie was the mastermind. She should be facing consequences too." I should have called the police immediately. Instead, I found myself asking, "Do you have proof?" He pulled an envelope from his jacket and extended it toward me. Address, photos, her work schedule at the diner. Everything Detective Hayes would need to find her. When I didn't reach for it, he placed it on the porch step. "Do what you want with it. My conscience is clear now." After he left, I stared at the envelope for nearly an hour before finally opening it. Inside were indeed photos of my mother, older, hair dyed dark brown instead of her natural blonde, but unmistakably Stephanie Wilson. Working behind a counter, walking along a harbor, entering an apartment building. Living a normal life while I had fought through hell to reclaim mine. When Jordan returned home, he found me still at the kitchen table, the photos spread before me. "We need to call Hayes," he said after I explained Mark's visit. "I know," I agreed. "But part of me wonders if we should just let her go. She's already lost everything that mattered to her, control over me, access to my money, her identity. Maybe that's punishment enough." Jordan sat beside me, covering my hand with his. "What do you need for closure, Autumn? Not what you think is right or wrong, but what you need." The question crystallized something I hadn't fully acknowledged. I need to see her face when she realizes she failed. That I'm not just alive, but thriving. That everything she tried to take from me, I've reclaimed and more. The decision made, we contacted Detective Hayes, who moved with surprising speed once presented with Mark's evidence. Within 24 hours, she had verified my mother's location and identity. Within 48, she had coordinated with Canadian authorities for surveillance. The question that remained was whether to arrest her immediately or set up the confrontation I had requested. "It's irregular," Hayes admitted during a conference call. "But given the circumstances and the strength of our case, my lieutenant has approved a controlled meeting before we take her into custody. You'll wear a wire, we'll have plainclothes officers nearby, and you'll have a distress signal if you need immediate intervention." Jordan was concerned. "Are you sure about this, Autumn? Seeing her could trigger significant trauma responses." "I've been preparing for this possibility with Dr. Ramirez for years," I reminded him. "If she had died on that mountain like she wanted everyone to believe, I would have found peace anyway. But since she's alive, I want her to see exactly what she couldn't destroy." 2 weeks later, Jordan and I boarded a flight to Victoria, British Columbia. Detective Hayes had traveled ahead to coordinate with local authorities. The plan was simple. I would enter the diner where my mother worked during her regular shift. Jordan and plainclothes officers would be positioned nearby. I would confront her, get whatever closure I needed, and then step aside for the arrest. The Harbor Light Diner was a small establishment catering to locals and the occasional tourist, situated near the ferry terminal with views of the bay. According to surveillance, my mother, now Claire, had worked the morning shift for over 2 years, serving breakfast and lunch before departing around 3 each afternoon. Seated in our rental car across the street, I watched customers enter and exit for nearly an hour, gathering courage. We can still walk away, Jordan reminded me. Hayes can make the arrest without you ever seeing Stephanie. I shook my head. I need this. Taking a deep breath, I added, but I need you with me. Not waiting outside. Are you sure? We discussed. I know. But I want her to see that I'm not alone. That I found the love and support she never gave me. Hayes adjusted the plan accordingly, and at precisely 1:45 p.m., Jordan and I entered the Harbor Light Diner. The lunch rush had subsided, leaving only a few occupied tables. And there, behind the counter refilling salt shakers, stood my mother. For years had changed her as they had changed me. Her once blonde hair was now a nondescript brown, styled simply rather than with the meticulous attention she'd once devoted to her appearance. Her face showed new lines, her posture less rigid than I remembered. She looked ordinary, smaller somehow, stripped of the power I had attributed to her for so long. We selected a booth with clear sight lines to the counter. A teenage waitress took our order, coffee for both of us, nothing more. I couldn't have swallowed food if I'd tried. She hasn't noticed us yet, Jordan observed quietly. Are you ready? I nodded, rising slowly, my cane making a soft tap against the linoleum floor as I made my way to the counter. First steps. 5. 6. Close enough now that she would hear me if I spoke. Close enough to see the name tag pinned to her uniform, Claire. Hello, Mom. 2 simple words that caused her world to collapse. She froze, salt shaker suspended midair, before slowly turning toward the voice she surely recognized but couldn't possibly be hearing. The shock on her face when she saw me standing there, not in a wheelchair but on my own feet, was everything I had imagined and more. Color drained from her features. The salt shaker slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. Autumn, she whispered, the name Claire Bennett falling away like the poor disguise it was. How are you? Alive? Standing? Here. I finished for her. All valid questions from someone who left her daughter to die on a cliff. Her eyes darted around the diner, noticing Jordan watching intently from our booth, perhaps sensing the plainclothes officers strategically positioned near the exits. The teenager behind the counter had stopped wiping glasses, attention caught by the palpable tension. We should talk somewhere private, my mother suggested, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. This isn't what you think. I can explain everything. There's nothing to explain, I replied, my voice steady. You stole my money. You isolated me from people who cared about me. You left me to die because I was inconvenient. Those are facts, not interpretations. She glanced toward the back door, calculating. Please, Autumn. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. The time for requests was 4 years ago, when I begged you not to leave me on that cliff, I said. But you walked away then. The difference is, I'm choosing to stand my ground now. Customers had begun to notice our exchange, conversations dying as attention shifted our way. My mother's expression hardened, the mask of Claire slipping further to reveal the Stephanie I remembered. You have no idea what I was going through, she hissed. The burden of caring for you, watching my entire life disappear into your needs. You were never going to get better. I was drowning. You were my mother, I replied simply. The person who should have protected me most. Instead, you saw my tragedy as your inconvenience. Her eyes narrowed. How did you find me? Was it Mark? That's spineless. Does it matter? What matters is that you failed. You left me to die, but here I stand. You took my money, but I built a new life. You tried to isolate me, but I found people who love me genuinely, not as an extension of themselves. Something shifted in her expression then. A flicker of the calculating woman I'd known replacing the cornered animal she'd momentarily become. You've done well for yourself, obviously. Perhaps we could start fresh. I am still your mother, after all. The audacity was so breathtaking I almost laughed. No, Stephanie. You forfeited that title on the cliff. I didn't come for reconciliation. I came so you would know you failed completely. Your prison hasn't been a cell these past years. It's been living as someone else, looking over your shoulder, knowing what you did. My prison was physical at first, but I escaped it. You built yours brick by brick, and you'll never truly escape it, even after you've served your time. Detective Hayes had approached silently during our exchange, positioning herself just behind my mother. At my subtle nod, she stepped forward. "Stephanie Wilson," Hayes began formally, "you're under arrest for attempted murder, fraud, theft, and identity fraud. You have the right to remain silent." As Hayes continued reciting rights, my mother's face transformed once more, shock giving way to fury, then collapsing into something like despair as handcuffs closed around her wrists. Our eyes met one final time as officers led her toward the door. "I did love you once," she said, barely audible. "Before everything got so twisted. I did love you." Whether the statement was manipulation or a moment of genuine reflection, I couldn't tell. Perhaps it didn't matter. "I believe you," I replied. "That makes what you did even worse." Outside the diner, Jordan wrapped his arm around my shoulders as we watched the police car pull away. "Are you okay?" The question had many possible answers, none of them simple. "I will be," I said finally. It's strange. I thought seeing her would feel more significant. Like a final battle. But she seemed so small. So ordinary. "Evil usually is," he observed. "It's rarely as dramatic as we imagine." Back in our hotel room that evening, emotional exhaustion finally caught up with me. Jordan held me as I cried, not for the mother I'd lost, but for the one I'd never truly had. The woman who had stood before me today was a stranger, as she perhaps always had been beneath the masks she wore. "I want to go home," I told Jordan as the tears subsided. Back to our life. Back to waiting for our adoption match. Back to all the things she tried to take from me. 3 days later, we returned to Seattle. Newspaper headlines announced the capture of the Cliff Abandoner, the sensational nickname media had assigned my mother years earlier. Interview requests flooded in, which my publicist politely declined. This chapter of my story belonged to me, not to public consumption. The legal process would continue without my daily attention. My mother faced extradition and eventual trial, but I had said everything I needed to say in that diner. My testimony was on record, my peace not dependent on judicial outcomes. 2 months after the confrontation, as winter softened into spring, the call we'd been waiting for finally came. A 3-year-old girl named Lily needed a home, and our profile had been selected by her caseworker as a potential match. Meeting her for the first time, I felt a circle closing. She was shy but curious, watching me with solemn eyes as I lowered myself to her level, setting my cane aside. "Hello, Lily," I said softly. "My name is Autumn. And this is Jordan." "You have a stick," she observed, pointing to my cane. "I do," I confirmed. "It helps me walk because my legs work differently than most people's." She considered this with the straightforward acceptance only children possess. "Okay. Do you have books at your house?" "We have lots of books," Jordan assured her. "And a backyard with a swing." Her eyes widened at this promising development. "Can I see?" The journey from that initial meeting to Lily becoming our daughter unfolded over the following months. Each step of the process reinforced what I had learned through my recovery. Family isn't defined by blood, but by choice, by commitment, by love that perseveres through hardship. My mother's trial began and concluded during this same period. She accepted a plea deal to avoid a public proceeding, receiving a 15-year sentence with possibility of parole after 10. I sent a written statement to be read at her sentencing, but did not attend. My focus remained firmly on the family we were building, not the one that had fractured. On a bright summer morning, Jordan, Lily, and I visited the rehabilitation center where our journey together had begun. Lily held my hand as we walked the corridors, greeting staff who had become friends over the years. In the physical therapy room, a young woman in a wheelchair watched with obvious frustration as her therapist demonstrated an exercise. "This is pointless," she muttered as we passed. "Nothing's changing." I paused, recognizing in her expression the same despair I had once felt. "Excuse me," I said. "I don't mean to intrude, but I was a patient here 4 years ago. Complete T10 spinal cord injury." Her eyes widened as she took in my standing position, the cane, my slow but definite gait. "But they told me complete injuries don't." "They told me that too," I smiled. "Sometimes the experts are wrong. Sometimes we write our own endings." Later, driving home with Jordan and Lily, I reflected on how differently my story might have ended had even one element changed. If Bailey hadn't suspected something was wrong. If Mason and Lily Collins hadn't hiked that stormy morning. If Dr. Carter hadn't questioned my previous treatment approach. "What are you thinking about?" Jordan asked, glancing away from the road briefly. "How our worst moments don't define us unless we let them," I replied, watching Lily doze in her car seat. "And how sometimes they become the foundation for our greatest joys." That evening, after tucking Lily into bed, I sat at my desk to finish the epilogue for my book. The final paragraph flowed easily. We often speak of being paralyzed by fear, by trauma, by loss. My body taught me that even physical paralysis isn't always permanent. How much more should we question the paralysis of spirit that keeps us bound to our past? The cliff where my mother left me became the place where I found my strength. The chair she believed would confine me became a tool for my independence. The story she tried to end became, instead, a beginning. Whatever cliff edge you're facing, remember this: the fall doesn't have to destroy you. Sometimes it teaches you how to rise. Have you ever faced a betrayal from someone who should have protected you? How did you find the strength to move forward? Share your story in the comments below. And if you found inspiration in my journey, please like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need to hear that their story isn't over yet. Thank you for joining me today, and remember, we all have the power to rewrite our endings, no matter how dark the middle chapters may be.